Arizona Territory, 1875. The merciless sun beat down on the dusty main street of Copper Springs as Willa Morrison stepped off the stagecoach, her pale blue traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of desert dust. At 20 years old, with honey blonde hair pinned neatly beneath her modest hat and determined green eyes, she looked decidedly out of place among the weather-worn faces of the frontier town. A small leather-bound journal clutched in her gloved hands contained everything she knew about gold prospecting, knowledge gleaned from books rather than experience, but knowledge nonetheless. "Last stop, miss," the driver called down, tossing her carpetbag to the ground with little ceremony. "Copper Springs, though there ain't been copper here for years, nor much of springs neither." Willa smoothed her skirts and lifted her chin. "Thank you for the geography lesson, sir," she replied with the crisp accent of her Boston upbringing. "I'm well aware of where I am." The truth was, she had never been less certain of her place in the world. 3 months ago, she had been the dutiful daughter of a failing merchant, facing the prospect of a loveless marriage to save her family from financial ruin. Now she was alone in the Arizona Territory with nothing but $50 sewn into her petticoat, a map to her late uncle's mining claim, and the unshakable belief that a woman with determination could succeed where men had failed. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, fortune was her only objective. As the stagecoach pulled away in a cloud of dust, Willa spotted the weathered sign of the Copper Springs Hotel. It looked nothing like the grand establishments of Boston, but it would have to do. She had just taken 3 steps toward it when the sound of thundering hooves made her turn. 4 riders charged down the street, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they whooped and hollered. Townspeople scattered from their path, ducking into doorways or pressing against building fronts. Willa froze, uncertain which way to move as the horsemen bore down upon her. "Look out," a voice called, and suddenly someone was rushing toward her. The collision knocked the wind from her lungs. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her clear of the riders as they thundered past, close enough that she felt the rush of air from their passing. For a moment, she was conscious only of being pressed against a firm chest that smelled of leather, horses, and sun-warmed cotton. "You all right, miss?" Her rescuer set her gently on her feet but kept a steadying hand at her elbow. Willa looked up into the face of a young man with eyes the color of the Arizona sky. His light brown hair curled slightly at his collar, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. Despite the dust and worn clothing, there was something undeniably handsome about his features, open, honest, and currently creased with concern. "I'm quite all right," she said, stepping back and straightening her hat. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Owen Ryder," he replied with a slight tip of his hat, "and those were the Callahan boys. They liked to make an entrance." "Well, they nearly made me part of the street," Willa muttered, brushing dust from her sleeves. She noticed Owen Ryder was watching her with undisguised curiosity. "You're new to Copper Springs," he said. It wasn't a question. "How very observant of you, Mr. Ryder. Yes, I've just arrived." "Family waiting for you." "Husband, maybe." Willa lifted her chin. "Neither, I've come on business." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Business in Copper Springs." "Yes, mining business, to be precise." She enjoyed the surprised look that crossed his face. Men always underestimated her, and she had learned to use that to her advantage. Owen Ryder's expression changed from surprise to something like concern. "Mining's a hard business, miss. Especially around these parts." "I'm aware of the challenges," Willa replied coolly. "Now if you'll excuse me, I need to secure accommodations." She turned toward the hotel, but his voice stopped her. "That hotel's not fit for a lady traveling alone." Willa turned back, bristling. "I don't recall asking for your assessment, Mr. Ryder." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No, you didn't, but Mrs. Holloway runs a boarding house on Pine Street. Clean, respectable, and she keeps a shotgun under the counter for unwanted visitors." Something about his smile made Willa momentarily forget her annoyance. "I thank you for the recommendation." "You're welcome, Miss Morrison." "Willa Morrison." "Miss Morrison," he touched the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Copper Springs. You might want to watch out for galloping horses in the future. And you might want to warn your local hooligans that the streets are for walking, not racing," she countered. Owen Ryder laughed, a warm sound that seemed at odds with the harsh landscape around them. I'll be sure to mention it next time I see them. Good day, Miss Morrison." As he walked away, Willa found herself watching him longer than propriety allowed. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not arrogant, strong but without menace, that intrigued her. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. She hadn't come west for a handsome face or kind eyes. She had come for gold, and nothing, certainly not a cowboy with an irritatingly charming smile, would distract her from that purpose. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was indeed clean and respectable, if sparsely furnished. The widow who ran it was a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Single women don't last long in Copper Springs," she said bluntly as she showed Willa to a small but tidy room on the second floor. "They either marry or move on. What's your business here?" "I've inherited a mining claim," Willa answered, setting her carpetbag on the narrow bed, "from my uncle, Edward Morrison." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose. "Old End Morrison's claim? That's been abandoned since he passed 2 winters ago. Nothing but bad luck and rattlesnakes out there." "Perhaps," Willa said, unwilling to be discouraged, "but I intend to make it profitable." The older woman let out a short, harsh laugh. "You and every other fool who's come to this territory. Well, it's your money to waste. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 6. No gentlemen callers in the rooms, and rent is due weekly in advance." After unpacking her meager belongings, Willa went downstairs to inquire about the location of the assay office. She needed to register her claim and find out the precise boundaries of the property she had inherited. The clerk at the assay office, a thin man with spectacles that continually slipped down his nose, seemed equally skeptical of her plans. "The Morrison claim? That's out past Rattlesnake Ridge, nothing but fool's gold and dry creek beds." He shuffled through a drawer of papers. "Here it is. Your uncle filed it in '69, worked it for 5 years without much to show. You'll need to pay a $5 fee to transfer the deed to your name." Willa handed over the money, watching as he scribbled her name on the document. "I'll also need to hire some workers and purchase supplies." The clerk peered at her over his spectacles. "Mining supplies you can get at Hendrick's General Store. As for workers," he shook his head, "most men with mining experience are either working the big operations north of here or drinking away their failures at the Silver Dollar Saloon. And where might I find someone to guide me to the claim itself?" "That be better asked at the livery stable. They know the trails." He handed her the deed. "Word of advice, Miss Morrison, this territory eats dreams for breakfast. Better to sell that claim for whatever you can get and take the next stage back east." Willa tucked the deed carefully into her reticule. "Thank you for your concern, but I didn't travel 2,000 miles to turn back at the first discouraging word." Outside, the afternoon sun was relentless. Willa made her way down the dusty street toward Hendrick's General Store, mentally calculating how far her funds would stretch. She would need tools, provisions, perhaps a tent, until she could assess the cabin her uncle had supposedly built at the claim. The store was cool and dim after the brightness outside. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with everything from pickaxes to patent medicines. A grizzled man with a white beard was arguing with the storekeeper about the price of coffee when Willa entered. "Highway robbery, that's what it is," the old man grumbled. "Take it or leave it, Pete. Train got delayed in Tucson again and supplies are scarce," the storekeeper replied, looking up as the bell over the door announced Willa's arrival. "Be with you in a moment, miss." Willa nodded and began examining the mining tools displayed along one wall. She knew their names from her reading: pickaxes, shovels, gold pans, sluice boxes, but had only a theoretical understanding of their use. "Now what's a lady like you doing looking at mining equipment?" The voice made her turn. Owen Ryder stood a few feet away, a sack of flour hoisted easily on one shoulder, his expression caught between amusement and curiosity. "Mr. Ryder, we meet again," Willa said, hiding her surprise at seeing him so soon. "I'm examining tools for my business venture, as I mentioned." "You weren't joking about the mining business." He set the flour down and approached her. "That's a rocker pan you're looking at, good for moving more dirt than a simple pan but heavy to transport." Willa studied the wooden contraption with renewed interest. "How much more efficient is it than a standard gold pan?" "Depends on the terrain and water supply," Owen replied. At the Morrison claim, water's your biggest problem. Creek only runs part of the year. She turned to face him fully. You know my uncle's claim. I know most of the land around here, he said with a shrug. I run cattle on the range north of Rattlesnake Ridge. Your uncle's place is just beyond the southern boundary of my ranch. Willa felt a flutter of excitement. Here was someone who knew the location of her claim, possibly even its condition. Mr. Ryder, would you be willing to guide me there? I would compensate you for your time, of course. Owen studied her for a long moment. It's rough country, Miss Morrison, not really suited for. For a woman, she finished for him, her voice cooling. I assure you, Mr. Ryder, I'm tougher than I look. I was going to say, for someone new to the territory, he corrected her, a hint of that smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Man or woman? The storekeeper called out from behind the counter, You finding everything all right, miss? Yes, thank you, Willa replied, then turned back to Owen. Mr. Ryder, I'm determined to see my claim with or without a guide. I would prefer with, as I acknowledge my lack of familiarity with the area. Would tomorrow morning be convenient? Owen's blue eyes held hers for a long moment before he nodded. I'll bring horses to Mrs. Holloway's at sunrise. Wear trousers if you have them, a dress will be nothing but trouble on the trail, and bring plenty of water. The Arizona sun isn't forgiving to newcomers. I don't own trousers, Willa said, slightly scandalized at the suggestion. Then I suggest you buy some. He gestured to a shelf where men's clothing was stacked, and a hat with a wider brim than that fashionable little thing you're wearing. Your face will be blistered red by noon otherwise. Before she could respond, Owen tipped his hat and headed for the door, pausing only to say, Sunrise, Miss Morrison. I don't wait for latecomers. The door closed behind him, leaving Willa staring after him with a mixture of irritation and anticipation. She had found a guide to her claim, which was a stroke of good fortune. The fact that he was the most handsome man she'd encountered in Copper Springs, perhaps in all her 20 years, was entirely irrelevant. Turning back to the storekeeper, she straightened her shoulders. I'll need a pair of men's trousers, please. And a proper hat for sun protection. The man's eyebrows nearly reached his hairline, but he made no comment as he fetched the requested items. That evening, in the privacy of her room, Willa tried on the trousers. They felt strange and immodest, clinging to her legs in a way that made her blush even though no one was present to see her. But when she moved around the small room, she had to admit they were far more practical than her skirts. She sat at the small desk and opened her journal, recording the day's events and expenses. At the bottom of the page, she couldn't resist adding a brief note, met a local rancher, Mr. Owen Ryder, who knows Uncle Edward's claim. He seems knowledgeable if somewhat presumptuous. He will guide me there tomorrow. I must remember that I came west for fortune, not friendship, and certainly not for the attention of blue-eyed cowboys, no matter how conveniently they might appear when needed. Closing the journal, Willa prepared for bed. Through the thin walls of the boarding house, she could hear the muffled sounds of the town settling for the night, distant piano music from the saloon, occasional laughter, the creaking of the wooden buildings cooling after the heat of the day. It was nothing like the genteel quiet of her Boston home, yet there was something oddly comforting about the raw vitality of this frontier town. Here, perhaps, she could forge a new life defined by her own choices rather than the expectations of society. With that hopeful thought, Willa blew out her lamp and closed her eyes, dreaming of golden streams and independence. True to his word, Owen Ryder arrived at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains. Willa, who had been awake for an hour already, watched his approach from her window. He led 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, dappled mare. Willa hurried downstairs, self-consciously tugging at the borrowed trousers that felt so foreign against her legs. She had pinned her honey-blonde hair tightly at the nape of her neck and donned the wide-brimmed hat purchased yesterday. A cotton shirt and vest completed her thoroughly unfeminine outfit. Mrs. Holloway eyed her from behind the breakfast counter. Going native already, I see. Merely being practical, Willa replied, accepting the cup of coffee the older woman offered. I should return by nightfall. See that you do. I lock the doors at 9 sharp. Outside, Owen was adjusting the saddle on the mare. He looked up as Willa approached, his eyes widening slightly at her appearance. "Good morning, Mr. Ryder," she said, fighting the urge to cross her arms over her chest. "Miss Morrison," he nodded, his expression unreadable, "you look prepared for the trail." "Is something amiss with my attire?" she challenged, chin lifting. A smile crept across his face. "Not at all, those trousers suit you better than I expected." Willa wasn't sure if she'd been complimented or teased. "I believe you mentioned sunrise. Shall we proceed?" "Yes, ma'am," Owen gestured to the dappled mare. "This is Mariposa, she's gentle but sure-footed, good for a beginner." "I'm not entirely unfamiliar with horses," Willa said, approaching the mare cautiously. "Though I must admit my experience is limited to riding side-saddle in Boston parks." "This will be different," Owen warned. "We've got rough country to cover. You'll want to grip with your knees and move with the horse, not against her." He demonstrated the correct way to mount, then offered his hand to help her. Willa hesitated only briefly before placing her gloved hand in his. With a surprising strength, he boosted her up into the saddle. For a moment, his hands remained at her waist, steadying her, and Willa felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at the contact. "Comfortable?" he asked, looking up at her. "Yes, thank you," she managed, adjusting her position. The feeling of straddling the horse was strange but not unpleasant. Owen nodded and moved to mount his own horse with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "It's about 2 hours to your uncle's claim if we keep a steady pace. Stay close and let me know if you need to rest." They set off down the main street, past buildings still shuttered in the early morning light, and soon left the town behind. The landscape opened up around them, vast and rugged, with red rock formations jutting toward the sky and scrubby vegetation clinging to the hard ground. Despite her initial nervousness, Willa found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait. The morning air was cool and clean, filled with unfamiliar scents, sage, dust, and something wild and untamed that seemed to embody the frontier itself. "Your uncle came out here in '69, Owen said after they had ridden in silence for some time. "He was one of the first to stake a claim in these parts after the Apache were pushed back to the reservation." "Did you know him well?" Willa asked, eager for any information about the relative she had never met. "Met him a few times. He was a loner like most prospectors, came to town for supplies once a month, spent the rest of his time out at his claim." Owen glanced over at her. "Mind if I ask why you're so set on working that claim yourself?" "It's not exactly conventional." Willa considered how much to share with this virtual stranger. "My father's business in Boston failed last year. He died shortly after, leaving my mother and me with substantial debts. When we learned of Uncle Edward's claim in his will, it seemed like an opportunity." She didn't mention the unwanted suitor who had offered to cover their debts in exchange for her hand, nor her mother's tearful insistence that she accept the proposal. "So you came looking for a fortune to save your family," Owen said thoughtfully. "Yes, though I'm beginning to understand why people call it a fool's errand," she admitted, gesturing to the harsh landscape around them. "This country doesn't give up its treasures easily." "No, it doesn't," Owen's expression softened, "but it has other compensations." "Such as?" He smiled and pointed ahead. "Look there." Willa followed his gaze to where a red-tailed hawk circled lazily in the clear blue sky, its wingspan impressive against the backdrop of rugged mountains. "Freedom," Owen said simply, "room to breathe. To be exactly who you are without apology." Something about his words resonated deep within her. In Boston, she had always felt confined by expectations, to be ladylike, to marry well, to sacrifice her own dreams for duty. Out here, with the vast sky overhead and the wild land stretching to the horizon, those constraints seemed distant and insignificant. They rode on, Owen occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming plants and animals they passed. He spoke of the land with genuine affection, and Willa found herself drawn to his evident love for this harsh but beautiful territory. "There," he said eventually, gesturing toward a rocky outcropping ahead, "Rattlesnake Ridge. Your uncle's claim is just beyond, in that small valley." As they crested the ridge, Willa got her first view of her inheritance. A small, weathered cabin stood near a dry creek bed. Around it, the earth had been disturbed in various places, evidence of her uncle's digging. A crude wooden structure that she recognized from her reading as a sluice box lay abandoned near what must be the creek bed when water flowed. It's not much to look at, Owen said as they approached the cabin, but the location isn't bad. That creek runs strong during the spring runoff, and the hills here have the right kind of quartz formations for gold deposits. They dismounted near the cabin, and Willa's legs protested after the long ride. Owen steadied her with a hand at her elbow. Careful, first long ride takes some getting used to. The cabin door hung slightly ajar. Owen pushed it open cautiously, checking inside before gesturing for her to enter. Looks clear. No critters have moved in, at least not recently. The interior was sparse but intact. A simple wooden bed frame with a straw-filled mattress, a table with a single chair, a small iron stove for cooking and heat. Dust covered every surface and cobwebs draped from the corners, but the roof appeared sound. This could be habitable, Willa said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The reality of living in such isolation was only now beginning to sink in. With some work, yes, Owen agreed, examining the walls. You'd need to chink these gaps before winter, though. Gets cold up here when the north wind blows. Willa moved to the single window, wiping away dust to look out at the claim. Where did my uncle find the most promising deposits? Owen joined her at the window. From what I heard, he was working that western slope the most toward the end. Said he found color in the gravel there. Color? Gold flakes, not enough for a big strike, but enough to keep him hoping. Owen's shoulder brushed against hers as he pointed. See where that quartz vein runs through the hillside? That's what you want to follow. His proximity sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the rising temperature outside. Willa stepped away, moving toward the door. I should examine the claim itself. That's why we came, after all. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, its heat intensifying. Willa was grateful for the wide-brimmed hat as she followed Owen toward the creek bed. Water's your biggest challenge here, he explained, kneeling to scoop up a handful of gravelly soil. You need water for most mining methods, panning, sluicing, even rockers. This creek only flows reliably for a few months each year. How did my uncle manage? He dug a small reservoir up there, Owen pointed to a depression in the land above the cabin, caught rainwater when it came. But it's been dry for a while now. Willa took the soil from his hand, examining it closely. Little specks of something shiny caught the sunlight. Is that? Mica, Owen said with a slight smile, fools a lot of newcomers. Gold is heavier, has a different shine to it. Here, I'll show you. He led her to the western slope he had pointed out earlier, where the ground had been extensively worked. Small pits and trenches scarred the hillside, evidence of her uncle's labor. This is where I'd start if I were you, Owen said, kneeling to dig at the base of a quartz outcropping. The gold tends to settle in these low spots. Willa knelt beside him, watching intently as he sifted through the soil. After a moment, he held out his palm. In it lay a tiny flake of metal, no larger than a grain of rice but unmistakably gold in color. There's your color, he said. Not much, but it's there. Willa stared at the tiny flake, torn between excitement and disappointment. It would take thousands of those to make any significant amount. Thousands upon thousands, Owen agreed. That's why they call it prospecting, not finding. The reality of her situation was becoming clearer with every passing moment. She had come west expecting to discover a fortune that would save her family. Instead, she found a dilapidated cabin, a dry creek bed, and gold flakes so small they were barely visible. It was foolish to come, she said quietly, more to herself than to Owen. Everyone tried to warn me. Owen stood, brushing dust from his hands. I wouldn't say foolish, optimistic maybe. Is there a difference out here? Sometimes optimism is all that keeps a person going, he gestured around them. This land doesn't give up its treasures easily, but it does reward persistence. Your uncle might have been close to something bigger when he passed. Willa rose to her feet, surveying the claim with new eyes. Or he might have wasted years chasing a dream that was never going to materialize. That's always the gamble, Owen admitted, but there are worse ways to live than chasing a dream under this sky. There was something about his quiet conviction that calmed the panic rising within her. Willa took a deep breath of the sage-scented air. Well, I'm here now, I might as well give it a proper attempt before admitting defeat. Owen's expression brightened. That's the spirit. Come on, I'll show you how to use a gold pan properly. It's not as easy as it looks in those dime novels. For the next several hours, Owen taught her the basics of gold prospecting, how to recognize promising soil, the proper technique for panning, what signs to look for when following a vein. To her surprise, Willa found the work engaging despite its difficulty. There was something satisfying about the methodical process, the way it required both patience and attention to detail. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. They retreated to the shade of a large boulder near the cabin to eat the lunch Mrs. Holloway had packed for them: bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. "So what's your plan?" Owen asked as they ate. "Will you stay out here alone?" Willa hesitated. Until this moment, she hadn't fully considered the practical aspects of working the claim. "I suppose I would need to hire help and obtain proper supplies. Hiring is expensive, especially for skilled miners, and they'll want payment up front, not promises of future gold." Owen's tone wasn't unkind, but realistic. "I have some funds," Willa said, though in truth, her savings would not stretch far. Enough to get started at least. Owen seemed to consider his next words carefully. "There's another option you might consider. Partnering with someone who already has equipment and experience." A partnership? The idea hadn't occurred to her. Are there reputable miners in Copper Springs who might be interested? Most experienced miners have their own claims or work for the bigger operations north of here. Owen hesitated. "But I know the land, and I have equipment at my ranch that could be adapted for mining." Willa studied him with surprise. "Are you proposing a partnership, Mr. Ryder?" "I might be," he said, meeting her gaze steadily. "My cattle range needs water during the dry months. That reservoir your uncle built could be expanded to serve both purposes. You'd get help working your claim, I'd get water access for my herd." It was a practical solution, but Willa was cautious. "Why would you involve yourself in a mining venture? You have your ranch to manage." "Truth is, cattle prices have been dropping, the railroads bringing in cheaper beef from Texas and Kansas. A little diversification wouldn't hurt." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I've always had a bit of gold fever myself, just never acted on it." Willa considered the proposal. A partnership would solve many of her immediate problems: lack of experience, equipment, and labor. But it would also mean surrendering some control over her claim and, potentially, any profits. "What terms would you propose?" she asked, her business sense asserting itself. "Equal partnership. We split any gold found 50-50. I provide equipment and labor when I can spare it from the ranch. You contribute the claim itself and whatever funds you can for supplies." Owen held her gaze. "And we'd both work the claim. I won't be a silent partner." The idea of working alongside Owen Ryder on a daily basis brought a flutter of something unexpected to Willa's stomach. She attributed it to nerves about the business proposition. "I would need to consider such an arrangement carefully," she said, "perhaps draw up a formal agreement." "Of course," Owen agreed readily. "Take your time. But not too much time. The best season for prospecting will be ending in a few months when the summer heat really sets in." As they finished their meal and prepared to explore more of the claim, Willa found herself watching Owen with new interest. He moved with the easy confidence of someone at home in this harsh environment, pointing out features of the land she would have overlooked, explaining geological formations with surprising knowledge. "How did you come to know so much about mining if you're a rancher?" she asked as they examined a promising quartz outcropping. "My father was a miner before he was a rancher," Owen replied, cracking a piece of rock with his hammer. "Came out here in the first gold rush back in '58, made enough to buy the ranch when prices were low, but he never lost his interest in prospecting. Taught me everything he knew." "And where is your father now?" A shadow crossed Owen's face. "Died 3 years ago, fever took him quick, left me the ranch and a lot of unfinished plans." "I'm sorry," Willa said softly. "I know what it's like to lose a parent." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Willa felt a connection deeper than their brief acquaintance warranted, a shared understanding of loss and obligation. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Owen glanced up at the sky where dark clouds were gathering over the western mountains. "Storm's coming," he said, his expression growing serious. "We should head back to town. These summer storms can turn nasty quick." They hurried back to the horses and Owen helped Willa mount. As they rode away from the claim, she turned for one last look at the cabin, her cabin now. Despite its dilapidated state, it represented possibility, a chance to forge her own path rather than submit to the constraints of her previous life. The ride back to Copper Springs was hurried, with the darkening sky and distant lightning spurring them on. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall when the town was still a mile away. "We're not going to beat it," Owen called over the rising wind. "There's a line shack just ahead where my ranch hands sometimes stay. We can wait out the worst of it there." The line shack proved to be little more than a one-room wooden structure with a small corral attached, but it offered shelter from the storm that was now unleashing its full fury. They led the horses into the corral's covered section and then dashed for the shack's door as rain poured down in sheets. Inside, the space was Spartan but dry: a small stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. Owen immediately set about lighting the stove while Willa stood dripping near the door, suddenly acutely aware of their isolation and proximity. "You're soaked through," Owen said, glancing up from the stove where a small fire was catching. "There are some old clothes in that trunk, probably won't fit well but they'll be dry." Willa hesitated, propriety warring with practical need. Perhaps I should simply wait for my own clothes to dry." "You'll catch your death," Owen said matter-of-factly. "I'll step outside while you change." Before she could protest, he had grabbed his slicker from a hook by the door and stepped back into the rain, closing the door firmly behind him. Left alone, Willa quickly decided that practicality must win over propriety. She opened the trunk and found a faded flannel shirt and a pair of canvas trousers that were far too large. Rolling up the sleeves and cuffs, she changed quickly, hanging her wet clothes near the stove to dry. When she called for Owen to return, he entered with an armload of firewood, water dripping from his slicker. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in the oversized clothes, but he made no comment as he added wood to the fire. "The storm looks to be settling in," he said, removing his wet hat and coat. "We might be here for a while." Willa sat in one of the chairs, trying not to show her discomfort at the impropriety of their situation. "Mrs. Holloway will assume the worst," she said, attempting to make light of the matter. "Mrs. Holloway was young once," Owen replied with a small smile. "She'll understand." The rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a cozy cocoon of sound around them. Outside, lightning occasionally illuminated the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes, followed by the rumble of thunder. "Are storms always this violent here?" Willa asked, watching rainwater stream down the single window. "Summer storms can be," Owen said, settling into the chair across from her. "They come up quick and hit hard, but we need the rain so no one complains too much." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the steady rhythm of the rain. Willa found herself studying Owen's profile as he gazed into the flames. There was a gentleness to him that belied his frontier strength, a thoughtfulness in his blue eyes that spoke of a mind that looked beyond the immediate concerns of survival. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, breaking the silence. "How long have you lived there?" Owen leaned back in his chair. "All my life. My father built the main house when he married my mother, added to it as the years passed. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid. Good grazing land for cattle, enough water most years." His expression softened with pride. "We run about 300 head now, mixed Hereford and Longhorn, good stock." "And you manage it alone?" "I have 3 hands who work for me year-round, more during roundup season. And a cook who doubles as housekeeper, Mrs. Farley. She came with her husband years ago, stayed on after he passed." He glanced at her curiously. "What about you? What was your life like in Boston?" Willa considered how to describe the constraints of her former existence. "Predictable," she said finally. "Every day ordered by routine and expectation. The right clothes for the right occasions, the proper words for the proper people." She gazed out at the wild storm. "Nothing like this." "And is that why you came west, to escape predictability?" "Partly," Willa admitted. though I told myself it was solely for financial necessity. The truth is, when I learned of my uncle's claim, I saw more than a potential fortune. I saw freedom. Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's what draws most people out here, the chance to write their own story. And you? Have you found that freedom on your ranch? A shadow crossed his face. In some ways, in others, he trailed off, then shrugged. Every choice comes with its own constraints, even out here. Before she could ask what constraints bound him, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the shack's walls and the door burst open. Owen jumped up to secure it, fighting against the wind and rain for a moment before managing to close and bar it. That was close, he said, returning to the stove, dripping wet once again. Storm's getting worse. Willa rose to offer him the blanket from the cot. You should change as well, your own clothes are as wet as mine were. Owen accepted the blanket with a nod of thanks. Turn around, he said simply. Willa complied, facing the wall as she listened to the sounds of him changing. Despite her attempt at propriety, her imagination painted vivid pictures of what she was deliberately not seeing. Her cheeks warmed and she was grateful that he couldn't see her face. Decent now, he said after a moment. When she turned, Owen had donned a dry shirt and trousers similar to the ones she wore, though they fit him properly. The blanket was draped around his shoulders, and he had moved to check on their wet clothes by the stove. Yours are drying nicely, he reported. Another hour or so, I'd say. A crack of thunder shook the small building, making Willa jump. Owen glanced at her with concern. We might be here through the night if this keeps up, he said quietly. The trail back to town will be mud and flash floods by now. The implication of his words wasn't lost on her. Spending the night alone with a man, even in these innocent circumstances, would be scandalous in Boston society. But they were far from Boston, and survival sometimes necessitated setting aside such concerns. Then we'll wait until it's safe to travel, Willa said with more composure than she felt. I'm sure Mrs. Holloway will understand, as you said. Owen smiled, genuine warmth in his expression. You're adaptable, Miss Morrison, that will serve you well out here. Willa, she said impulsively. If we're to be storm-bound together, you might as well call me Willa. Willa, he repeated as if testing the sound of it, then you must call me Owen. The simple exchange of first names felt strangely intimate in the close confines of the shack. Willa returned to her chair, acutely aware of Owen's presence as he moved about the small space, checking the security of the windows and adding more wood to the fire. Are you hungry? He asked, opening a small cupboard near the stove. There are always basic supplies kept here for the hands, nothing fancy but enough to make a meal. The domesticity of the situation struck Willa suddenly, the two of them sharing this simple shelter while the storm raged outside, preparing to share a meal like a married couple. The thought brought heat to her cheeks again. Yes, thank you, she managed, rising to help. What can I do? Together, they prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits from the stored supplies. The familiar task of cooking helped normalize the unusual situation, and Willa found herself relaxing as they worked side by side in the warm, close quarters of the lined shack. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily. Owen told stories of ranch life, cattle drives, and the characters he'd encountered, the challenges and satisfactions of raising livestock in the harsh territory. Willa spoke of Boston, her education, and her dreams of independence that had always seemed so impossible in the structured Eastern society. I never fit the mold of what a proper Boston lady should be, she admitted. Always too curious, too outspoken, too interested in business matters that were considered men's domain. Their loss, Owen said with a smile. Out here those qualities keep you alive. The simple compliment warmed her more than the fire. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain lashing against the windows and wind moaning around the eaves. But inside, a different kind of warmth was growing, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. As night fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, the practical matter of sleeping arrangements had to be addressed. The shack contained only the single narrow cot, barely wide enough for one person. You take the cot, Owen said firmly. I'll make do on the floor near the stove. That hardly seems fair, Willa protested. It's your lined shack. And you're my guest, he countered. Besides, I've slept on worse during roundups and cattle drives. Recognizing that arguing would be futile, Willa accepted the arrangement. Owen fashioned a makeshift bedroll from his slicker and some old blankets from the trunk, placing it a respectful distance from the cot. The awkwardness of preparing for sleep in such close proximity was unavoidable. They took turns using the small wash basin in the corner, maintaining as much privacy as the confined space allowed. When all preparations were complete, Owen extinguished the lamp, leaving only the glow of the stove to illuminate the shack. "Good night, Willa," he said softly from his position on the floor. "Good night, Owen," she replied, lying stiffly on the narrow cot, acutely aware of his presence only a few feet away. Despite her exhaustion from the day's activities, sleep eluded her. The storm's continued fury provided a dramatic backdrop to her tumultuous thoughts. In just 2 days, her perception of her future in the Arizona territory had completely transformed. What had seemed a straightforward quest for gold had become complicated by unexpected factors. The harsh realities of mining, the proposed partnership, and most disturbing of all, her growing attraction to Owen Ryder. She had not come west seeking romance. Such entanglements would only distract from her purpose and potentially compromise her independence. Yet there was something about Owen that resonated with her in a way no Boston gentleman ever had: his self-sufficiency, his quiet strength, his evident respect for her determination despite its unconventionality. From his breathing, Willa could tell that Owen was also awake. The knowledge that he lay there in the darkness, perhaps with thoughts similar to her own, sent a shiver of awareness through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Owen," she said softly, surprised by her own boldness. "Yes," his voice came immediately, confirming her suspicion that he was awake. "Tell me something about yourself that no one in Copper Springs knows." The darkness made her brave, allowing her to ask for a confidence that daylight propriety would forbid. There was a long pause, and Willa wondered if she had overstepped. Then Owen's voice came again, quieter now. "I write poetry." Of all the confessions she might have expected, this was perhaps the most surprising. "Poetry," she repeated. "Nothing worth publishing," he said, a hint of self-consciousness in his tone. "Just thoughts about the land, the sky. Things I see that seem worth remembering." Willa smiled into the darkness. "Will you recite one for me?" Another pause, longer this time. Then Owen's voice, soft but steady, desert bloom after rainfall. "Brief and brilliant life against stone. What courage to flourish here, where everything conspires against beauty." The simple verse hung in the air between them, intimate in the storm-wrapped darkness. "That's lovely," Willa said honestly. "You capture the spirit of this place." "Your turn," Owen said. "Tell me something no one in Boston knows about you." Willa considered what secret to share. "I learned to shoot a pistol when I was 16, she admitted finally. "My father's clerk taught me in secret. Father would have been scandalized." Owen's soft laugh warmed the space between them. "Practical skill out here. Why did you want to learn?" "I read too many adventure novels," Willa confessed, "and I suppose I wanted to feel capable of protecting myself. There's a certain powerlessness in being a woman in Boston society. The pistol was my small rebellion." "Did you bring it with you?" "It's in my carpetbag at Mrs. Holloway's. I'm not sure I remember how to use it properly anymore." "I could refresh your memory," Owen offered. "Might be useful skill for a woman living alone at a mining claim." The reminder of her purpose sobered Willa. "If I decide to stay," she said, "after today I'm not certain the claim is viable." "No quick decisions," Owen advised. "Give it time. Give yourself time to know the land." The conversation drifted to other topics: books they had read, places they hoped to see, small confidences exchanged in the intimacy created by darkness and the storm's isolation. Gradually, Willa felt her eyelids growing heavy, the day's exertions finally claiming her. Her last conscious thought was that she had never felt so comfortable with anyone before, never so free to be herself without constraint or judgment. It was a dangerous feeling, one that threatened the independence she had come west to find. But as sleep claimed her, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Morning arrived with startling brightness, the storm having cleared during the night to leave a washed-clean sky of intense blue. Sunlight streamed through the shack's single window, falling across Willa's face and waking her from a deep sleep. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her still drowsy mind. Then memory returned, the storm, the lined shack, Owen. She sat up quickly, looking for him. The space where he had made his bed was empty, the blankets neatly folded. Before she could wonder where he had gone, the door opened and Owen entered carrying a bucket of water. "Good morning," he said, his voice cheerful. "Thought you might want to wash up before we head back to town." Willa was suddenly acutely conscious of her rumpled appearance, hair loosened from its pins, borrowed clothes wrinkled from sleep. She smoothed her hands over her hair, attempting to restore some order. "What time is it?" she asked, embarrassed to have been caught sleeping while he had clearly been up and productive. "Just past sunrise," Owen replied, setting the bucket near the wash basin. "Roads will still be muddy but passable. I've fed and watered the horses." His matter-of-fact tone helped normalize the unusual situation. Willa rose from the cot, accepting the small towel he offered. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. Your hospitality under unexpected circumstances was most appreciated." A smile touched the corner of Owen's mouth. "You make it sound like a social call rather than being stormbound in a lined shack. Perhaps because you made it feel less compromising than it might have been," Willa said honestly. Owen's expression grew more serious. "Your reputation matters to me, Willa. We'll head straight back to town, and if anyone asks, we took shelter from the storm for safety's sake, which is nothing but the truth." His consideration touched her. In Boston, a night spent unchaperoned with a man would have been catastrophic for a young woman's reputation. But as Owen had said, the frontier had different rules, survival often trumped social niceties. They ate a quick breakfast of leftover biscuits and coffee, then prepared to depart. Willa's clothes had dried overnight, and she changed back into them while Owen waited outside. The familiar feel of her own clothing helped restore her sense of propriety, though part of her would miss the freedom of movement the borrowed trousers had allowed. The ride back to Copper Springs was slower than their outward journey, the trails slick with mud from the previous night's downpour. Everywhere, evidence of the storm's fury remained, washed-out sections of path, debris carried downstream by flash floods, even a fallen tree that forced them to make a detour. "The claim probably got a good soaking," Owen commented as they rode. "Might be worth going back soon to check for exposed color. Sometimes a heavy rain washes away topsoil and reveals deposits that weren't visible before." Willa nodded, her mind already returning to the practical concerns of her mining venture. "I've been considering your partnership proposal," she said. "I believe it makes good sense, provided we can agree on terms that protect both our interests." Owen glanced at her with surprise. "I thought you'd want more time to consider." "I'm not usually indecisive once I see the logic of a situation," Willa replied. "The partnership solves problems for both of us. It would be foolish to delay out of unnecessary caution." A smile spread across Owen's face. "I'm beginning to think your Uncle Edward wasn't the only Morrison with a streak of frontier practicality." "Perhaps it runs in the family," she agreed, returning his smile. By the time they reached Copper Springs, it was mid-morning. The town was bustling with activity, people taking advantage of the cooler air and clear skies after the storm. Several heads turned as they rode down the main street, and Willa could almost feel the speculation in the gazes that followed them. At Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, they dismounted. Owen held the reins of both horses, standing awkwardly as Willa prepared to go inside. "I'll have a proper agreement drafted for the partnership," he said. "Should be ready by tomorrow, if you'd like to stop by the ranch to discuss it." "That would be fine," Willa replied, suddenly shy in the light of day and under public scrutiny. The easy intimacy of their conversations in the lined shack seemed distant now. "My ranch is northwest of town, about 3 miles, Owen continued. "Anyone can direct you. Or I could come back to town if that's more convenient." "No, I'll come to you," Willa decided. "I should see the operation I'm potentially partnering with after all." Owen nodded, seeming pleased by her decision. "Tomorrow, then." "Mid-morning." "Mid-morning," she agreed. An awkward moment followed where neither seemed to know the proper way to conclude their unexpected adventure. Finally, Owen tipped his hat, a gesture that seemed inadequate after the connection they had formed but was appropriate for their public setting. "Until tomorrow, Miss Morrison," he said formally once more. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Ryder," she replied, matching his tone. As she watched him ride away, leading Mariposa behind his own mount, Willa was struck by the strange duality of her feelings. In less than 3 days in the Arizona territory, she had found both the independence she sought and an unexpected connection that threatened it. The challenge would be to balance the two without sacrificing either. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face Mrs. Holloway, who stood in the doorway of the boarding house with her arms crossed and one eyebrow raised questioningly. "The storm," Willa explained simply. "We had to take shelter." Mrs. Holloway's expression remained neutral. "Owen Ryder is a good man," she said after a moment. "One of the few in these parts worth considering." "If you're considering." Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I came west for my uncle's gold claim, Mrs. Holloway, not for consideration of that nature." The older woman's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "Life has a way of giving you what you need instead of what you think you want, girl. Remember that." With those cryptic words, she turned and went back inside, leaving Willa to wonder if perhaps the frontier's greatest challenge wouldn't be the harsh land or elusive gold, but rather the unexpected emotions it seemed determined to unearth within her. The next morning, Willa rose early, taking special care with her appearance. She chose her most practical dress, a navy blue cotton with minimal frills, and arranged her honey blonde hair in a simple but neat style. The effect was businesslike but feminine, appropriate for discussing a business partnership. At the livery stable, she arranged to rent a gentle mare for the day. The stableman gave her directions to the Ryder ranch, though his curious glance suggested the purpose of her visit was already a subject of town speculation. The ride northwest of Copper Springs took her through a changing landscape. The arid desert gave way gradually to more verdant terrain as she approached the foothills. Small streams, swollen from the recent storm, crossed her path occasionally. The air smelled different here, still sage and dust, but with undertones of grass and pine from the higher elevations. After about an hour's ride, Willa crested a rise and saw the Ryder ranch spread before her. It was larger than she had imagined, a substantial main house of hewn logs with a broad porch, several outbuildings, corrals containing horses, and in the distance, the dark shapes of cattle grazing on the hillsides. As she approached, a dog began barking, alerting the household to her arrival. A weathered man in his 50s emerged from one of the outbuildings, watching her approach with undisguised curiosity. "Good morning," Willa called as she drew near. "I'm looking for Mr. Ryder." "Which one?" the man asked, his tone friendly but cautious. "The boss or his brother?" Willa hesitated, caught off guard. Owen had never mentioned a brother. "Owen Ryder," she clarified. "He's expecting me." The man nodded and gestured toward the main house. "He's in there. I'm Frank, one of the hands. You must be Miss Morrison." News traveled quickly, it seemed. "Yes, thank you." Frank helped her dismount and took the reins of her horse. "I'll see to your mount. Just head on up to the house. Mrs. Farley will get you settled." The main house was impressive up close, solidly built with a wide, covered porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. Flower boxes hung from the railings, filled with hardy blooms that added unexpected color to the frontier dwelling. It spoke of permanence and care, a true home rather than merely shelter. Before Willa could knock, the door opened, revealing a stout woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Despite her stern appearance, her eyes were kind as they assessed Willa. "Miss Morrison, I presume," she said. "I'm Mrs. Farley." "Come in, Owen's expecting you." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, not lavish by Eastern standards, but well appointed with solid furniture, colorful woven rugs, and walls adorned with paintings of Western landscapes. A large stone fireplace dominated one end of the main room, while bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that spoke of serious reading rather than mere decoration. "Owen's in his study, Mrs. Farley explained, leading Willa through the house. "Fussing over papers all morning he has been. Would you like some coffee or tea?" "Coffee would be lovely, thank you," Willa replied, trying not to appear too interested in the domestic details of Owen's home. Yet she couldn't help noticing the touches that revealed character: books left open, a guitar in one corner, fresh wildflowers in a simple vase on the dining table. Mrs. Farley knocked on a door at the rear of the house. "Owen, your guest is here," she called. The door opened immediately and Owen appeared, looking more formally dressed than Willa had yet seen him, in a clean white shirt and dark vest. His hair was neatly combed and he had shaved. The transformation from frontier horseman to gentleman rancher was striking. "Willa," he said, his smile warming his blue eyes, "you found us without trouble." "The directions were excellent," she replied, suddenly aware of Mrs. Farley's interested observation of their interaction. "I'll bring coffee," the older woman announced, giving Owen a look that Willa couldn't interpret before departing toward what must be the kitchen. Owen ushered Willa into his study, a compact room with a desk, more bookshelves, and a small sitting area near the window. Papers were spread across the desk, along with an inkwell and several books on mining law. "I've been working on our agreement," he explained, gesturing to the papers. "Wanted to make sure everything was clear and fair." Willa appreciated his thoroughness. "I'd like to review the terms, of course." "Of course," Owen agreed. "But first, would you like a tour of the ranch? It seems right that you should see what you're potentially partnering with." The idea appealed to her. "I would like that very much." They spent the next hour walking the property, with Owen proudly showing her the operations of the ranch. He introduced her to the other hands they encountered, weathered men who tipped their hats respectfully but couldn't quite hide their curiosity about the Boston lady touring their domain. The cattle were impressive, the breeding stock particularly so, and the entire operation spoke of careful management and planning. "Your father built all this?" Willa asked as they walked back toward the house. "Started it," Owen corrected. "I've expanded some, added the north pasture, and improved the breeding stock. It's good land when the rains come enough." "And when they don't?" His expression grew more serious. "That's when we struggle. Last summer was dry, lost nearly 30 head to poor grazing and limited water. That's why your uncle's reservoir interests me. With access to that water during dry spells, we could reduce our losses significantly." The practical reason for his interest in partnership reassured Willa. While she couldn't deny the attraction between them, a business arrangement based purely on emotions would be doomed to failure. Back at the house, Mrs. Farley had prepared not just coffee but a light meal of fresh bread, cheese, and preserves. They sat at the dining table to discuss the partnership agreement while they ate. The terms Owen proposed were fair, even generous. In addition to splitting any gold found equally, he offered to provide transport for ore to the assay office, use of his equipment, and labor from his ranch hands during less busy seasons. In return, he would gain water rights to the expanded reservoir and a 20% stake in the claim itself. "The claim stake is negotiable," he added as Willa reviewed the document. "I know it's your inheritance." "No, it's fair," Willa said thoughtfully. "You're contributing significant resources, and without water access, the claim's value is limited regardless." They discussed specific details for another hour, making small adjustments to the agreement until both were satisfied. When the final document was prepared, Willa signed with a steady hand, officially creating the Ryder Morrison Mining Partnership. "To success," Owen said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "To success," Willa echoed, touching her cup to his. As they finished their meal, the front door opened and heavy footsteps sounded in the entryway. A moment later, a man appeared in the dining room doorway, taller than Owen, broader through the shoulders, with the same color hair but darker eyes. His expression registered surprise at seeing Willa. "Didn't know we had company," he said, his voice deeper than Owen's. Owen stood. "Willa, this is my brother Oliver. Oliver, Miss Willa Morrison from Boston. She owns Edward Morrison's old claim. We've just formed a partnership to work it." Oliver Ryder's gaze moved from Willa to the signed papers on the table, something unreadable crossing his features. "Mining partnership. That's new." "Miss Morrison has a promising claim that needs development," Owen explained, "and we need additional water access for the herd. It's a practical arrangement." Oliver made no comment but stepped forward to offer his hand to Willa. "Welcome to Ryder Ranch, Miss Morrison. Hope my brother's not boring you with too many details about cattle breeding and water rights." His tone was light, but Willa sensed an underlying tension between the brothers. Not at all, she replied politely. Your ranch is impressive. You must be proud of what your family has built here. It's home, Oliver said simply. To Owen, he added, fence line on the east pasture needs repair after that storm. Martinez and I were heading out to fix it. I'll join you shortly, Owen replied. Need to see Miss Morrison back to town first. Oliver nodded, tipped his hat to Willa, and departed with a final curious glance between her and his brother. Your brother seems protective of the ranch, Willa observed once he had gone. Owen's expression was difficult to read. Oliver's more traditional than I am, believes we should focus solely on ranching, not diversify. He shook his head slightly. Don't mind him. He'll come around when he sees the benefits of our arrangement. Willa wasn't so certain, having caught the disapproval in the older Ryder's glance, but she kept her thoughts to herself. Family dynamics weren't her concern. The success of their partnership was. Owen insisted on accompanying her back to town, despite her protests that she could find her way alone. They rode side by side, discussing practical next steps for the mining operation, supplies they would need, the best approach to expanding the reservoir, how soon they could begin serious prospecting. The creek should be running well after the storm, Owen said as they rode. We could start tomorrow if you're ready, see if there's any exposed color worth pursuing. Willa agreed readily, eager to begin the actual work of mining now that the business arrangements were settled. Yet as they continued toward town, she found herself watching Owen more than the trail, noting the easy way he sat his horse, the animation in his face as he spoke of their plans. There was something profoundly appealing about his blend of frontier capability and thoughtful intelligence. In Copper Springs, they parted at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house with arrangements to meet the following morning for another ride to the claim. As Willa watched Owen ride away, she was struck by how quickly her circumstances had changed. 1 week ago, she had been a Boston merchant's daughter facing an unwanted marriage. Now she was a mining entrepreneur with a business partner who made her pulse quicken whenever he smiled. Fortune or folly, she murmured to herself as she climbed the steps to the boarding house. I suppose time will tell which I've found out here. The following weeks fell into a pattern that gradually began to feel like a new kind of normal for Willa. Most days she and Owen worked at the claim from early morning until late afternoon. They focused first on expanding the reservoir, damming the small seasonal creek to create a more substantial water supply for both mining operations and Owen's cattle. The physical labor was unlike anything Willa had experienced in Boston. Her hands, once soft and unmarked, developed calluses. Her fair skin tanned despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore faithfully. Muscles she hadn't known she possessed ached at the end of each day, only to grow stronger with continued use. To her surprise, she found satisfaction in the work itself, regardless of results. There was something fundamentally rewarding about seeing tangible progress. The reservoir expanding day by day, the test pits yielding small but encouraging amounts of color, the cabin gradually becoming more habitable as they repaired its deficiencies. More surprising still was how naturally she and Owen worked together. He never treated her as incapable because of her gender, instead showing her how to perform various tasks and then trusting her to complete them. When she had ideas for improving their methods, he listened with genuine interest and often implemented her suggestions. You have a good mind for this, he told her one afternoon as they sat in the shade of the cabin, taking a brief respite from the midday heat. Most newcomers take years to develop the instincts you're showing. Willa flushed with pleasure at the compliment. I've always enjoyed solving practical problems. In Boston, it was considered an unladylike trait. Their loss, Owen said, repeating his earlier sentiment. Out here, practical thinking keeps you alive. As they worked together day after day, their initial attraction deepened into something more substantial. Willa found herself looking forward to their conversations as much as the mining itself, discussions that ranged from practical frontier matters to books they had both read, from childhood memories to hopes for the future. Owen, she discovered, was not only knowledgeable about ranching and mining but widely read, with an appreciation for poetry that went beyond his own modest attempts. He could quote Shakespeare and Mark Twain with equal facility, discuss the merits of different translations of Homer, or explain complex geological principles with clarity. "How did you become so well-educated out here?" she asked one day as they worked side by side, panning gravel from a promising section of the creek bed. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father," Owen explained, his hands moving skillfully through the repetitive motions of panning. "She believed education was just as important as practical skills. Taught Oliver and me herself until she died, then made father promise to continue our learning." "She sounds remarkable," Willa said, watching him for any sign of the grief such memories might bring. "She was," Owen agreed, his expression softening. "Strong-willed, passionate about knowledge. She would have liked you." The simple statement warmed Willa more deeply than she cared to admit. "And your brother? Did he share your mother's love of learning?" A slight shadow crossed Owen's face. "Oliver learned what he needed to run the ranch, never cared much for poetry or philosophy," he smiled ruefully. "He thinks I waste too much time with books when there's real work to be done." "Yet you manage both the ranch and your education," Willa observed. "That's admirable." Owen shrugged, seeming embarrassed by the praise. "Look here," he said, changing the subject as he tilted his pan toward her. "See that line of color against the black sand? That's a good showing." Willa leaned closer, momentarily forgetting propriety as her shoulder pressed against his to better see into the pan. "It's beautiful," she said, watching the tiny flakes of gold glinting in the sunlight. When she looked up, Owen's face was inches from hers, his blue eyes reflecting the same golden light that illuminated the pan's contents. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her, despite all her resolutions about independence. Instead, he cleared his throat and moved slightly away. "We should collect this in the vial," he said, his voice a touch rougher than usual. "Keep track of our findings systematically." The moment passed, leaving Willa with confusing emotions, disappointment mingled with relief. She had not come west seeking romance, she reminded herself firmly. Her purpose was financial independence, not emotional entanglement. Yet increasingly, she found herself looking forward to these moments of connection more than the prospect of finding gold. As their partnership progressed, Willa began spending time at the Ryder ranch as well as the claim. Often, they would stop there on their way back from mining to clean up before she returned to town. Sometimes, especially after particularly long days, Mrs. Farley would insist she stay for dinner. The ranch house began to feel almost as familiar as her room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. She came to know the ranch hands by name: Frank, the foreman who had greeted her on her first visit; Martinez, a skilled horseman with a quiet demeanor; and young Jimmy, barely 17 but already a capable cowhand. Only Oliver Ryder remained distant, often absent when she visited or present only long enough to exchange minimal courtesies before finding reasons to be elsewhere. His disapproval was evident, though he never expressed it directly in her presence. "He thinks I'm distracting you from the ranch," Willa said to Owen one evening as they sat on the front porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the western sky in dramatic colors. Owen didn't deny it. "Oliver sees the world in simpler terms than I do," he said after a moment. "The ranch is everything to him. Anything that doesn't directly benefit it is a waste of time. And he sees me, our partnership, as a diversion from what matters." "He doesn't understand what matters to me," Owen said quietly. Then, with a slight smile, "Besides, the partnership is already benefiting the ranch. The expanded reservoir held through that dry spell last week when other ranchers were struggling." It was true. Their first practical accomplishment had been completing the reservoir improvements, which were already proving valuable during a stretch of rainless days. The mining itself was proceeding more slowly, yielding enough color to be encouraging but not yet the significant find they hoped for. "We'll prove the value of diversification," Willa said confidently, "both with water and with gold eventually." Owen's expression softened as he looked at her. "You know, when you first arrived in Copper Springs, I never would have guessed you'd adapt so well to frontier life. Most Easterners either leave quickly or spend years complaining about what they've left behind." "I had nothing to leave behind that I valued," Willa admitted, "only constraints and expectations that never fitted who I truly am." "And who are you, Willa Morrison?" Owen asked, his voice gentle in the gathering twilight. The question caught her off guard with its simplicity and depth. "I'm still discovering that," she said honestly. but I know I'm someone who values independence, who finds satisfaction in meaningful work, who prefers direct speech to society's polite fictions." She hesitated, then added more softly, "Someone who feels more alive in this harsh territory than she ever did in civilization's comfort." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. The frontier strips away pretense. Forces you to confront what's real in the land and in yourself. Is that why you stay, when you could have pursued education or opportunities elsewhere? Partly, he acknowledged, but also because this land gets into your blood. The openness, the challenge of it, the raw beauty. He gestured to the sunset blazing before them, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. How could any city compare to this? Willa followed his gaze, seeing the landscape through his eyes, not just as terrain to be conquered or exploited, but as something alive and worthy of love in its own right. It was a perspective she was gradually adopting herself, finding beauty in the very harshness that had initially seemed so forbidding. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast sky overhead, Willa knew she should return to town. Mrs. Holloway maintained her curfew strictly, and tongues were already wagging about the amount of time she spent in Owen Ryder's company. Yet she lingered, reluctant to break the peaceful connection of the moment. Owen seemed equally disinclined to end their evening, his usual energy stilled into contemplative calm beside her. "I should go," she said finally, when the first coyotes began their distant chorus. "I'll saddle the horses," Owen replied, though he made no immediate move to rise. Instead, he turned toward her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Willa, I want you to know that whatever happens with our mining venture, whether we strike it rich or barely break even, I consider myself fortunate to have met you." The simple sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "As do I," she managed to say, her own voice not quite steady. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, might finally bridge the careful distance they had maintained despite their growing closeness. Instead, he stood and offered her his arm with gentlemanly formality. "Mrs. Holloway will have my hide if I make you late," he said lightly, though something in his eyes remained serious. Willa accepted his arm, feeling the solid strength of him even through the layers of clothing that separated them. As they walked toward the stables, she wondered if they were both avoiding the inevitable, acknowledging the feelings that had grown between them far beyond the bounds of a simple business partnership. And if they did acknowledge them, what then? Would those feelings strengthen her new independence or undermine it? It was a question she was not yet ready to answer, though she suspected the frontier would force a reckoning sooner rather than later. Summer progressed into early fall, bringing subtle changes to the landscape around Copper Springs. The most brutal heat relented, replaced by days that were merely warm and nights that carried the first hint of coming coolness. The mining partnership continued, yielding steady if modest results, enough gold to be encouraging but not the significant strike they had hoped for. Willa had fully settled into her new life, dividing her time between the claim and town, with frequent visits to the Ryder ranch. She had become a familiar figure in Copper Springs, earning grudging respect from many who had initially dismissed her as an Eastern dilettante playing at frontier life. Even Mrs. Holloway had softened toward her, occasionally offering advice about surviving desert winters or preserving food when supplies were plentiful. The boarding house had become something approaching a home, though Willa still dreamed of eventually making the cabin at the claim habitable enough for full-time occupation. On a clear September morning, Willa and Owen were working a new section of the claim, following a promising vein of quartz that disappeared into a hillside. They had been carefully excavating for several days, creating a small tunnel that extended about 15 feet into the slope. "The color's getting stronger," Owen observed, examining the rock face where they were working. "See how the quartz is changing character here? That's often a good sign." Willa nodded, learning to recognize the subtle indicators that experienced miners could read like a book. "Should we extend the tunnel further?" "A few more feet at least," Owen agreed. "But carefully, we need to shore up these walls better if we go much deeper." They worked companionably through the morning, taking turns excavating in the confined space of the tunnel and carrying the extracted material outside for processing. By midday, they had advanced another 3 feet into the hillside. "Let's break for lunch," Owen suggested, wiping sweat from his brow. "Then we can process this latest batch and see if our color is improving." They sat in the shade of a large boulder near the cabin, sharing the lunch misses. Farley had packed for them bread, cheese, dried fruit, and her famous molasses cookies that Owen particularly enjoyed. "I've been thinking," Owen said as they ate, "the cabin could be made quite comfortable with a few more improvements. The roof needs better sealing before winter rains, and the stove should be replaced. It's rusted through in places." Willa looked at him curiously. "Are you suggesting I might live here eventually?" "It seems a waste to ride back and forth from town every day," he replied, not quite meeting her eyes. "And you've mentioned wanting to be closer to the claim." There was something in his tone that suggested more than practical considerations motivated his thoughts. Willa chose her words carefully. "It would be convenient," she acknowledged. "But a woman living alone at a remote claim would cause even more talk than our partnership already has." Owen was silent for a moment, seeming to debate with himself. Finally he said, "You wouldn't have to be alone." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had voiced directly before. Willa's heart quickened, but before she could respond, a distant sound caught their attention. "Ryder's coming," Owen said, rising quickly. His hand moved instinctively to the revolver he always wore at his hip when they were at the claim. Willa stood as well, shading her eyes to see 3 horsemen approaching from the direction of Copper Springs. As they drew nearer, she recognized Oliver Ryder in the lead, with Frank and Martinez following. "It's your brother," she said, puzzled by their unexpected appearance. Owen relaxed slightly but remained alert. Oliver rarely visited the claim, making his presence now unusual enough to cause concern. The riders approached at a fast clip, reining in their mounts sharply as they reached the cabin. Oliver's expression was grim as he dismounted. "What's wrong?" Owen asked immediately. "Trouble at the ranch," Oliver replied. "Cattle raiders hit the north pasture last night, took about 20 head, shot Simmons when he tried to stop them." "Jim Simmons. Is he?" Owen's face had paled beneath his tan. "Alive, but badly wounded. Doc Thompson's with him." Oliver's gaze shifted between his brother and Willa. "We're riding after the raiders. Track them heading west toward the territorial border." Owen nodded grimly. "I'll come now. How many men?" "We count at least 6, Frank interjected. "Professional outfit, not just opportunists." "I need to get Miss Morrison back to town first," Owen began, but Willa interrupted. "No, you should go immediately. I can make my way back to town alone. I know the trail well now." Oliver shook his head. "Not safe, those raiders could still be in the area." "I'll escort her," Martinez offered, "then catch up with you." Owen looked torn, clearly concerned for both Willa's safety and his wounded ranch hand. Willa made the decision easier for him. "Go," she said firmly. "Your people need you." "I'll be fine with Martinez." After a brief hesitation, Owen nodded. "Be careful," he told her, his eyes conveying more than his words. "I'll come to town as soon as I can." The urgency of the situation prevented any more personal exchange. Within minutes, Owen had collected his rifle from the cabin and mounted his horse. With a final glance at Willa, he rode off with Oliver and Frank, heading west at a rapid pace. Martinez helped Willa gather her belongings and secure the cabin, then they set off toward Copper Springs. The young ranch hand was quiet by nature, offering little conversation beyond necessary communications about their route. As they rode, Willa's mind was filled with worry, for Owen's safety as he pursued armed cattle thieves, for the injured ranch hand, and selfishly, for the conversation that had been interrupted just as it seemed about to take a significant turn. "You wouldn't have to be alone." The words echoed in her thoughts, along with the look in Owen's eyes as he'd spoken them. Had he been about to propose something more personal than their business partnership, and if so, how would she have responded? The question troubled her all the way back to Copper Springs, where Martinez saw her safely to Mrs. Holloway's doorstep before departing to rejoin his comrades. "Be careful," she called after him. "All of you." He tipped his hat in acknowledgement, then spurred his horse westward, leaving Willa with nothing to do but wait and worry. 3 days passed with no word from Owen or the Ryder Ranch. Willa tried to occupy herself with tasks in town, purchasing supplies, reviewing their mining records, writing to her mother in Boston, but anxiety gnawed at her constantly. On the afternoon of the fourth day, she was sorting through mining equipment at Hendrick's General Store when the door opened, and Owen walked in. His face was stubbled with several days' growth of beard, his clothes dusty from the trail, and a nasty-looking scrape marked one cheekbone. But he was alive and walking under his own power. Relief surged through Willa so powerfully that she forgot propriety, crossing the store in quick strides to meet him. "You're back," she said, stopping just short of embracing him as she suddenly remembered they were in public. "Are you hurt?" Owen's tired expression brightened at the sight of her. "Just scratched up, nothing serious." "And the others, Jim Simmons?" "Simmons will recover, though slowly. Everyone else came through all right." His expression darkened. "We caught up to the raiders at the territorial border. There was a fight. 2 of them won't be stealing cattle again." The grim statement reminded Willa of the harsh realities of frontier justice. "And your cattle?" "Recovered most of them. Lost a few that scattered during the fighting." Owen ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm sorry I couldn't get word to you sooner. We've been riding hard for 2 days to get back." "You're here now." "That's what matters." Willa was shocked by how much she meant those words, how deeply his safety mattered to her. Owen glanced around the store, seeming to remember their public location. "Could you step outside for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." Curious and slightly concerned, Willa followed him onto the boardwalk outside the store. Owen led her a short distance away from the entrance, where they could speak without being overheard by those inside. "There's something you should know," he said, his expression serious. "One of the raiders we captured had information about other planned attacks, specifically mentioned the Morrison claim as a potential target." Willa felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "My claim? Why would they target a small operation like ours?" "Word gets around," Owen said grimly. "People in town have seen us bringing in regular amounts of gold for assay. Nothing spectacular, but enough to attract attention, and remote claims with minimal security are easy targets." "What should we do?" Willa asked, practical concerns overriding her fear. "I don't think you should stay in town alone anymore," Owen said firmly. "It's too dangerous to be at the claim by yourself, but you're also vulnerable here if they decide to try something." "Are you suggesting I abandon the claim?" Willa asked, dismayed at the thought after all their work. "No," Owen replied quickly. "I'm suggesting you stay at the ranch for now. We have enough men there to provide security, and you can still ride to the claim with me during the day." The proposal made practical sense, yet Willa hesitated. Staying at the Ryder ranch would put her even more firmly under the community's scrutiny, potentially compromising her reputation beyond repair. "What about propriety?" she asked quietly. Owen's expression softened. "Mrs. Farley is a proper chaperone, and your safety is more important than gossip." He was right, of course. If raiders were targeting remote mining operations, the isolated claim was dangerous, and even Mrs. Holloway's boarding house offered little real protection. "Very well," Willa agreed, "but only until this threat is resolved." Relief crossed Owen's face. "Good, I'll come for you in the morning. Pack whatever you'll need for an extended stay." As they parted, Willa reflected on how dramatically her circumstances continued to evolve in this frontier territory. Each new development seemed to draw her and Owen closer together, regardless of her initial intentions to maintain independence. Yet strangely, she no longer viewed these deepening connections as threats to her autonomy. Instead, they were becoming the framework for a different kind of independence, one built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than isolation. That evening, as she packed her belongings in preparation for the move to the Ryder ranch, Willa opened her journal. The entries chronicled her transformation from Boston merchant's daughter to frontier miner, but they also revealed something else: the gradual opening of her heart to possibilities she had never previously considered. Her final entry for the night was brief but telling. "Tomorrow I move to the Ryder ranch for safety's sake. Yet I find myself anticipating the change with something beyond practical relief. In Boston, I feared that marriage would mean the end of my independence. Here, I begin to wonder if the right partnership might actually expand it. Perhaps true freedom isn't found in standing entirely alone, but in choosing connections that strengthen rather than confine." With that thought lingering in her mind, Willa closed the journal and finished her preparations for the change that morning would bring. Life at the Ryder Ranch quickly developed its own rhythm, distinct from both town living and the isolated days at the claim. Willa was given a comfortable bedroom in the east wing of the house, well separated from the brothers' quarters to maintain propriety. Mrs. Farley, clearly delighted to have another woman in the household, fussed over her with motherly attention. Each morning, Willa and Owen would ride to the claim after an early breakfast, work through the day, and return to the ranch by dusk. The mining continued to yield modest returns, though they had yet to find the significant strike that would transform their venture from promising to profitable. To Willa's surprise, Oliver's attitude toward her gradually shifted from cool distance to grudging acceptance. The catalyst seemed to be her willing participation in ranch chores during the evenings and her genuine interest in learning about cattle operations. "You handle that calf better than most cowboys on their first try," Oliver commented one evening when Willa had helped with a difficult birth in the barn. Her dress was mudded and her hair had come loose from its pins, but there was unmistakable respect in his voice. "Thank you," she replied, gently stroking the newborn calf as its mother licked it clean, "though I suspect flattery. I must look a fright." "Appearances mean less out here than capability," Oliver said with unexpected warmth. "My brother saw that in you before I did. I was wrong to doubt his judgment." The simple acknowledgement touched Willa deeply. She had come to recognize how much Oliver's approval meant to Owen, making this shift in attitude significant for all of them. As September gave way to October, the threat from the cattle raiders appeared to diminish. The territorial marshal had increased patrols along the border, and several more members of the gang had been captured. Yet Owen remained cautious, insisting that Willa continue to stay at the ranch rather than return to town. "The claim is showing more promise now," he argued when she raised the question of returning to Mrs. Holloway's. "It makes sense for you to be closer to it, especially as we've expanded operations." It was true. Their mining venture had grown in the past weeks, with additional equipment acquired and occasional help from the ranch hands during slower periods of the cattle operation. The tunnel they had been excavating when the raid interrupted their work had proven particularly promising, yielding higher concentrations of gold with each extension. And if Willa was honest with herself, she had come to love life at the ranch in a way she had never expected. The daily routine suited her, productive work during the day, followed by evenings of conversation around the dinner table or on the porch as the spectacular Arizona sunsets painted the sky. Mrs. Farley's cooking was far superior to the boarding house fare, and the sense of being part of a functioning household rather than a solitary boarder brought unexpected contentment. Most of all, there was Owen's constant proximity. Their days together at the claim had already created a deep bond, but living under the same roof, seeing him at breakfast with his hair still damp from washing, hearing him play the guitar softly in the evening, observing the quiet competence with which he managed the ranch's many demands. These daily intimacies were weaving him into the fabric of her life in ways both profound and irreversible. One crisp October evening, Willa sat on the porch finishing a letter to her mother. The sun had set, leaving a deep blue sky scattered with emerging stars. Owen had been meeting with the ranch hands about the next day's work but now emerged from the bunkhouse and approached the porch. "Beautiful night," he commented, settling into the chair beside hers, "clear enough to see all the way to tomorrow." Willa smiled at the poetic observation, your mother's influence showing again. She loved the night sky, Owen agreed. Said it reminded her how small our troubles really are in the grand scheme. Wise woman, Willa said, setting aside her writing. I've been meaning to ask, did the marshal provide any update about the raiders? Is it truly safe now? Owen was quiet for a moment. The immediate threat seems to have passed, he said finally. The gang is mostly captured or dispersed. Then perhaps I should return to town, Willa suggested, though without much conviction. I wouldn't want to impose on your hospitality indefinitely. Is that what you want? Owen asked, turning to face her more directly, to return to town. The simple question deserved an honest answer. No, Willa admitted, I've come to feel at home here in a way I never expected. Something in Owen's expression shifted, a tension releasing. I'm glad, he said softly. Because there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. Willa's heart quickened. There was a seriousness in his tone that suggested this wasn't about mining operations or water rights. "The tunnel at the claim," he continued, surprising her with the practical topic. "I believe we're very close to something significant. The quartz formation is changing character in a way that typically precedes a rich deposit." "That's encouraging," Willa said, trying to hide her confusion at this unexpected direction. "If we do find a substantial deposit," Owen went on, "it would change our circumstances considerably. Provide capital for both the ranch and whatever else we might choose to pursue." "Certainly, that's been our hope all along." Owen nodded, seeming to gather his thoughts. "What I'm trying to ask, not very skillfully, is what you envision for your future if the claim proves as valuable as I believe it might." The question caught Willa off guard. She had been so focused on the immediate challenges of frontier survival and making the claim viable that she had given little thought to what might come after success. "I suppose I would secure my mother's financial situation first," she said thoughtfully. Beyond that, she hesitated, then continued honestly, "When I first came west, I thought only of fortune and independence. I wanted to prove I could succeed where others saw only a woman out of her proper sphere." "And you've done that," Owen said with evident pride. "Whether or not we find that big strike, you've already succeeded where many men have failed." His praise warmed her, perhaps, but I've also discovered that the independence I sought isn't quite what I imagined. She looked out at the vast starlit landscape. "I thought it meant standing entirely alone, answering to no one. Now I understand it's more about having the freedom to choose one's connections rather than having them dictated by society or circumstance." Owen was silent for a long moment, absorbing her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intent. "Willa, I've never met anyone like you. Your courage in coming west alone, your determination to succeed, your willingness to learn and adapt, they're remarkable." He turned more fully toward her, his expression visible even in the gathering darkness. "I know you came seeking fortune, not personal entanglements, but I find myself hoping that perhaps you found room for both in your vision of independence." Willa's breath caught as the conversation's true direction became clear. "Owen, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, only that you consider possibilities you might not have included in your original plans." He reached slowly for her hand, giving her every opportunity to withdraw it. When she didn't, his fingers closed around hers with gentle warmth. "I believe we could build something extraordinary together," he continued, "not just a mining operation or a ranch, but a life. One where your independence isn't compromised but strengthened by partnership." The sincerity in his voice and the careful respect with which he framed his not-quite proposal touched Willa deeply. This was nothing like the cold financial arrangement her mother had urged her to accept in Boston. This was an invitation to a shared future based on mutual respect and genuine affection. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, though her heart was racing with emotions that belied her uncertainty. "You don't need to say anything yet," Owen assured her. "Just think about it, about us. About whether what we've built together might extend beyond gold and water rights." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles before releasing it, a gesture both respectful and intimately promising. Then he stood, seeming to understand her need for space to process his words. "Good night, Willa," he said softly. "Sleep well." As he disappeared into the house, Willa remained on the porch, her mind and heart in turmoil. She had not come west seeking love. Yet here it was, offered with the same straightforward honesty that characterized everything about Owen Ryder. And if she was truly honest with herself, she had already begun to love him in return, his quiet strength, his thoughtful mind, his respect for her capabilities, his vision that somehow included both freedom and connection. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. If she acknowledged these feelings, accepted what Owen was offering, it would fundamentally alter the independent life she had come seeking. Yet it would not be the diminishment she had always feared from marriage, but rather an expansion, a sharing of strengths rather than a surrender of autonomy. Sleep was long in coming that night as Willa wrestled with questions of heart and future. By morning, she had reached no firm conclusion, only a willingness to explore the possibility that her frontier journey might lead to destinations she had never anticipated when she first stepped off the stagecoach in Copper Springs. The following day at the claim was charged with unspoken tension. Neither Willa nor Owen directly addressed their conversation from the previous evening, focusing instead on their work in the tunnel, which was indeed showing increasingly promising signs. "The quartz is changing exactly as I expected," Owen observed, holding a lantern closer to the tunnel face where they were working. "See how it's becoming more fractured, and these dark streaks running through it. Those are excellent indicators." Willa nodded, grateful for the practical focus that distracted from her emotional confusion. "How much further should we excavate before processing this section?" "Another foot, perhaps 2, Owen replied. "The color concentration is increasing with each advance." They worked steadily through the morning, taking turns at the narrow tunnel face. By midday, they had progressed another 18 inches into the hillside, and the extracted material was showing the strongest indications of gold they had yet encountered. "Let's process this batch before continuing," Owen suggested as they carried the latest buckets of ore outside. "If it's as rich as it looks, we might want to adjust our approach." They set up their equipment near the creek, where the recent rains had provided enough flow for effective panning and sluicing. Working together with practiced efficiency, they began processing the material from the tunnel. The results exceeded even their optimistic expectations. Nearly every pan showed significant color, with some containing gold flakes larger than any they had previously found. As they worked through the extracted ore, their excitement grew. "Owen, this is substantial," Willa said as she examined a particularly promising pan, "much more than we've seen before." Owen nodded, his expression a mix of satisfaction and growing excitement. "I think we've finally found the edge of a proper deposit, if the concentration continues to increase as we follow the vein deeper." He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. They both understood the implications. After months of modest returns, they might be on the verge of the significant strike they had hoped for, the one that could transform their venture from marginally profitable to genuinely valuable. As the afternoon progressed, their findings continued to improve. By the time they were ready to return to the ranch, they had accumulated more gold in a single day than in any previous week of operation. "We should register these findings at the assay office tomorrow," Willa said as they secured the day's yield in a small leather pouch. "And perhaps consider hiring additional help if the deposit continues to prove this rich." Owen agreed, though his expression had grown more thoughtful as the day progressed. "Willa," he said as they prepared to depart, "if this is what I think it is, everything could change very quickly." "I know," she replied, understanding his meaning. "Success brings its own complications." "Including potential danger," Owen added more seriously. "News of a significant strike will travel fast, and there are always those looking to profit from others' good fortune." Willa hadn't considered this aspect, but she immediately recognized the truth in his warning. "What should we do?" "For now, say nothing in town about the extent of our findings, register them officially but be discreet." Owen's expression was grave, "and I think we should increase security at the claim. I'll have one of the hands stay here overnight for the foreseeable future." The precautions made sense, though Willa found it somewhat jarring to consider that their long-sought success might actually increase their vulnerability. It was yet another reminder of the frontier's harsh realities. Wealth could be as dangerous as poverty in a land where law was still being established. As they rode back to the ranch, Willa found herself watching Owen's profile against the setting sun. The potential strike had added yet another dimension to her already complicated feelings. If the claim proved as valuable as today's findings suggested, she would achieve the financial independence she had sought. She could return east if she chose, secure in her ability to support herself and her mother. Yet the thought of leaving the Arizona territory, of leaving Owen, created an ache in her chest that no amount of gold could soothe. Somewhere in these months of partnership, this harsh land had become home, and this quiet, thoughtful man had become essential to her happiness in ways that transcended business arrangements. The next morning, they rode into Copper Springs with samples of their findings for the assay office. As Owen had suggested, they were discreet, not drawing attention to the potential significance of their discovery. The Asir, however, immediately recognized the quality of the ore they presented. "This is excellent color," he said, examining the samples with practiced eyes. "Where exactly on your claim did you find this?" "In the western section," Willa replied vaguely. "We've been following a promising quartz vein." The Asir nodded, his interest clearly piqued. "Well, if there's more where this came from, you could be sitting on something quite valuable. I'll have the official assessment ready by tomorrow." As they left the assay office, Owen placed a cautioning hand on Willa's arm. "Word will spread regardless of how careful we are," he said quietly. "We should make arrangements for additional security right away." They spent the next hour securing supplies and making discreet inquiries about hiring experienced miners to help expand their operation. By the time they were ready to return to the ranch, Willa could already sense a subtle shift in the way townspeople regarded them: curious glances, conversations that paused as they passed, a new attentiveness from the storekeeper who had previously treated her with casual indifference. "News travels fast in a small town," she observed as they mounted their horses. "Especially news about gold," Owen agreed grimly. "Let's get back to the claim. I want to secure that tunnel entrance before dark." They had just turned their horses toward the edge of town when a voice called out from behind them. Miss Morrison, wait." Willa turned to see a young boy running toward them, waving what appeared to be a telegram. "Telegraph came for you, miss," the boy panted as he reached them. "Operator said it was urgent." Willa accepted the telegram with a sense of foreboding. The only person who would telegraph her was her mother, and urgency suggested troubling news. "Thank you," she said, pressing a coin into the boy's hand. With Owen waiting patiently beside her, Willa opened the telegram. The message was brief but devastating. "Mother gravely ill, stop doctors, fear worse, stop please return Boston immediately, stop Aunt Margaret." Willa felt the blood drain from her face. Her mother, the only family she had left, was dying, and she was thousands of miles away in the Arizona territory. "What is it?" Owen asked, alarmed by her expression. "My mother is very ill," Willa said, her voice hollow with shock. "I need to return to Boston immediately." The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as their claim was showing true promise, just as she and Owen seemed on the verge of acknowledging deeper feelings, reality intervened with cruel precision. Owen's expression reflected her own dismay, but his response was immediate and supportive. "Of course you must go. We'll arrange for your departure on the next eastbound stage." "But the claim, our discovery." "We'll still be here," Owen said firmly. "Your mother won't wait. Family comes first always." His unhesitating support in the face of his own disappointment only confirmed what Willa already knew in her heart. Owen Ryder was a man of exceptional character, someone who placed others' needs above his own desires. "Thank you," she said simply, fighting against tears that threatened to overwhelm her composure. They rode directly to the stagecoach office, where they learned that the next eastbound stage would depart early the following morning. It would begin the long journey that would eventually connect with the Transcontinental Railroad in Utah Territory, and from there to the eastern states. "I'll need to pack," Willa said, her mind racing with practical considerations even as her heart ached with worry and regret, "and make arrangements for the claim while I'm gone." "Don't concern yourself with the claim," Owen assured her. "I'll manage everything in your absence. Just focus on reaching your mother as quickly as possible." As they rode back to the ranch to prepare for her hasty departure, Willa felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Just hours ago they had been celebrating the potential realization of her frontier dreams. Now she was rushing back to the very place she had fled, uncertain when, or if she would return. The evening passed in a blur of preparations. Mrs. Farley helped her pack, while Owen arranged for funds to be transferred to cover her travel expenses. Oliver, displaying unexpected kindness, offered to ride ahead to the next town to ensure the stagecoach company reserved her seat all the way to the railroad connection. Through it all, Willa moved with outward efficiency that belied her inner turmoil. Beyond worry for her mother, she couldn't escape the haunting sense that fate had intervened at the precise moment when her future seemed clearest, as if to remind her that nothing in life was certain, especially on the frontier. Later that night, when the house had grown quiet and her packing was complete, a soft knock sounded at her bedroom door. When she opened it, Owen stood there, his expression grave but tender. "I thought you might want this," he said, holding out the small leather pouch containing her share of the gold they had discovered, "for expenses and to help with your mother's care." Willa accepted the pouch, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, I hadn't even considered the practical aspects of what might await me in Boston." "May I come in for a moment?" Owen asked. "Just to talk." In any other circumstance, such a request would have been scandalously improper. But with her imminent departure and the serious nature of their conversation, conventional propriety seemed less relevant than the need for honest communication. Willa stepped back, allowing him to enter the room while leaving the door partially open as a concession to appearances. Owen remained standing near the entrance, maintaining a respectful distance. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that whatever happens in Boston, your place here is secure. The claim is yours, the partnership continues. Take whatever time you need with your family without worry about matters here." His consideration brought a lump to Willa's throat. "That's very kind, but we both know circumstances can change rapidly. I have no idea how long I might be gone or what conditions might require of me there." Owen nodded, acknowledging the uncertainty. "True enough. But I want you to have options, not obligations. If you can return, there will be a place for you. If not," he hesitated, then continued more softly, "at least know that what we've built here meant something important to both of us." The careful wording, acknowledging their connection while imposing no claims or expectations, moved Willa deeply. This was what had drawn her to Owen from the beginning. His respect for her independence even as he offered partnership. "It has meant everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "more than I ever expected to find when I came west." Owen took a half-step forward, then stopped himself. "Willa, he broke off, seeming to struggle with words that might say too much or too little for this moment of uncertain parting. Instead of speaking, he reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I want you to have this," he said, extending his hand. In his palm lay a small, rough nugget of gold, not from their recent discovery, but one she recognized from their first days of prospecting together. It had been the first piece of significant size they had found, and Owen had kept it as a token of their partnership's potential. "To remind you of what waits here," he said as she accepted it. "Whether or not you choose to return to it." The simple gift carried meaning far beyond its material value. It represented not just their business venture but the deeper connection that had grown between them, a connection now interrupted by circumstances neither could control. "I will treasure it," Willa promised, closing her fingers around the nugget. "And Owen, I." She stopped, uncertain how to express feelings she was only beginning to fully understand herself, especially when their future was now clouded by her imminent departure. Owen seemed to understand her hesitation. "No promises, no declarations," he said gently. "Not now when everything is uncertain. Just know that whatever you decide when your family obligations are resolved, I will respect your choice." His understanding was yet another confirmation of why her feelings for him had grown so deep. Even in this moment of potential loss, he placed her freedom to choose above his own desires. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Owen nodded, then stepped back toward the door. "Dawn comes early," he said. "You should rest while you can, the journey east is long." "Good night, Owen," Willa said, feeling the inadequacy of conventional phrases for this moment that felt like so much more than a routine parting. "Good night, Willa," he replied. Then, with a final glance that conveyed what words could not, he stepped into the hallway and closed the door quietly behind him. Left alone, Willa sank onto the edge of her bed, the gold nugget still clutched in her palm. The smooth weight of it against her skin seemed to embody all the contradictions of her frontier experience, both hard and precious, rough-edged yet valuable, extracted from difficulty yet worth every effort. Tomorrow she would begin the long journey eastward, back to the world she had left behind. But she would carry with her not just this token of gold, but something far more valuable, the knowledge that she had found in the harsh Arizona territory, not only the fortune she had sought, but also the heart of a man who understood that true partnership strengthened rather than diminished independence. Whether fate would allow her to build upon that discovery remained to be seen. But as she finally lay down to rest, Willa knew with certainty that whatever awaited her in Boston, the Arizona Territory had already given her a treasure beyond price, a vision of what life could be when based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine affection. It was a vision worth fighting to preserve, even against the uncertain tides of fortune and family that now called her back to the east. The stagecoach journey east was grueling, days of being jostled over rough roads, nights in crude way stations with minimal comforts, and the constant anxiety of knowing that each mile carried her further from Owen while her mother's condition remained unknown. Willa had sent telegrams ahead from major stops along the route, but responses were impossible to receive while constantly moving. When she finally reached Boston after nearly 2 weeks of travel, the city seemed both achingly familiar and strangely foreign. The orderly streets, the brick buildings, the carefully maintained parks, all spoke of civilization's comforts that she had done without for months. Yet the very orderliness that had once seemed natural now felt constraining after the wild openness of the Arizona Territory. A hired carriage took her from the train station to her family's home in a respectable but no longer fashionable neighborhood of Boston. The house itself, a narrow, 3-story brownstone, appeared shabbier than she remembered, small repairs obviously neglected during her absence. Aunt Margaret met her at the door, her thin face lined with exhaustion and worry. "Thank God you've come," she said, embracing Willa briefly. "Your mother has been asking for you." "How is she?" Willa asked, dreading the answer. "Holding on," Margaret replied, her expression grave. "The doctor calls it consumption. She took ill shortly after your last letter arrived and has weakened steadily since." Willa felt a stab of guilt. Her mother had never approved of her Western adventure, had begged her not to go, had worry over her only daughter's safety in the savage territories contributed to her illness. "I should see her immediately," Willa said, setting aside her travel bag. Margaret nodded. "She's upstairs, the doctor visits daily, but—" She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear enough. The sick room was dim and close, heavy curtains drawn against the autumn sunlight. Elizabeth Morrison lay propped against pillows, her once plump frame now alarmingly thin, her breathing labored even in sleep. Willa's heart contracted at the sight of her mother's deterioration. "Mother," she said softly, taking the frail hand that rested atop the coverlet. Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open, taking a moment to focus. "Willa," she whispered, her voice threadbare, "you came back." "Of course I came," Willa said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I came as soon as I received word." A ghost of a smile touched her mother's pale lips. "My wild girl back from the frontier," her fingers tightened weakly around Willa's. "Tell me you found your fortune, tell me it was worth it." The question pierced Willa's heart. Had it been worth it, leaving her mother alone to chase a dream of independence and gold? In this moment of reunion and impending loss, she wasn't certain. "I found many things," she said carefully. "The claim shows promise. And I've learned much about myself." "Good," Elizabeth whispered. "I worried. Such a place for a young woman alone." "I wasn't entirely alone," Willa said, thinking of Owen. "I formed a partnership with a local rancher. He's been very helpful." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than her words, for Elizabeth's eyes sharpened with motherly perception. A partnership or something more? Willa hesitated. It began as a business arrangement, but— "He is a good man, Mother, honorable, intelligent, kind." "You care for him?" Elizabeth observed. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Willa admitted, "though everything is uncertain now." Her mother's expression softened. "Life is always uncertain, my dear. That's why we must grasp happiness when it presents itself." A spasm of coughing interrupted her words, leaving her gasping for breath. Willa supported her mother through the attack, her own eyes filling with tears at her mother's evident suffering. When the coughing subsided, Elizabeth lay back exhausted, her breathing shallow. "Rest now," Willa urged. "We can talk more when you're stronger." But they both knew the likelihood of increased strength was small. Elizabeth Morrison was dying, her body consumed by a disease that medicine had few answers for. The best Willa could hope for was to ease her mother's remaining days and be present for her final moments. The days that followed fell into a somber routine. Willa spent most of her time at her mother's bedside, reading to her when she was awake, simply sitting with her when sleep claimed her. Aunt Margaret managed the household and received the doctor, while Willa focused entirely on making her mother comfortable. During brief respites while her mother slept, Willa wrote letters to Owen updating him on her situation, to the assay office in Copper Springs ensuring her claim remained registered in her name, to Mrs. Holloway asking her to store some personal items Willa had left behind. The act of writing connected her to the life she had built in the Arizona Territory, a life now in suspension as she attended her dying mother. Owen's reply came after 10 days, his neat handwriting covering several pages with news of the claim and the ranch. The tunnel continued to yield promising ore, he reported, and he had hired 2 experienced miners to help expand operations, with all proceeds carefully documented for her return. The ranch was preparing for winter, with the cattle being moved to lower pastures and supplies laid in for the colder months ahead. His final paragraph was more personal, less guarded than their previous communications. The cabin stands empty without you, though I've continued improvements as we discussed. The new stove is installed, the roof properly sealed against winter storms. Martinez has taken to leaving wildflowers on the table when he checks the security, saying the place needs a woman's touch even in absence. I find myself pausing at the doorway each evening before departing, remembering our conversations by the fire, your determined expression as you studied the day's findings, the way the sunset gilded your hair through the western window. The Arizona Territory continues its harsh beauty, but I confess it seems diminished without your presence to appreciate it alongside me. Take what time you need with your mother. We will be here, the land and I, waiting for your return should circumstances allow it. Willa read the letter multiple times, drawing comfort from the connection it represented even across thousands of miles. She kept it in her pocket, occasionally touching the paper as if to reassure herself that the frontier life she had begun still existed, still waited for her decision. As November deepened toward winter, Elizabeth Morrison's condition worsened. The doctor increased his visits to twice daily, administering what comfort he could but offering little hope for recovery. Willa rarely left her mother's side now, snatching sleep in the chair beside the bed, alert to every labored breath and restless movement. During one rare lucid period, Elizabeth beckoned Willa closer. "There are papers," she whispered, "in my desk, the small drawer with the silver key." "What papers, Mother?" Willa asked, concerned by this sudden urgency. "Debts." "And the deed," Elizabeth's fingers plucked restlessly at the coverlet. "I had to mortgage the house after your father, the payments." Understanding dawned. "You're concerned about the house. Don't worry about that now, Mother. We'll manage." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to maintain appearances, for your future, your prospects, but without your father's business." "Shh," Willa soothed, stroking her mother's thin hand. "It doesn't matter now. Rest easy." But later, when her mother slept, Willa found the silver key and opened the small drawer in the rosewood desk that had been her father's. Inside lay a stack of papers that confirmed her worst suspicions. The house was heavily mortgaged, with payments several months in arrears. Notices from creditors, some marked "Final Warning," indicated that financial collapse had been imminent even before Elizabeth fell ill. It explained so much, her mother's desperate attempts to arrange a marriage for her with an older, wealthy merchant. Her distress when Willa chose to seek her fortune in the West instead. The gradual decline in household staff and maintenance that Willa had attributed to simple economy. Elizabeth Morrison had been silently drowning in debt while maintaining the facade of genteel respectability, all for her daughter's sake. The discovery added a new dimension to Willa's grief and guilt. She had left her mother to face financial ruin alone, chasing her own dreams of independence while Elizabeth struggled to preserve what remained of the family's position. Using a portion of the gold she had brought from Arizona, Willa arranged to bring the mortgage payments current and settle the most pressing debts. It depleted much of her savings, but it bought time for her mother to live out her final days without financial worry, time for Willa to determine what would become of the house afterward. As November turned to December, Boston's streets filled with holiday preparations, wreaths on doors, candles in windows, shop displays tempting passers-by with Christmas gifts. Inside the Morrison house, however, the atmosphere remained somber and quiet, marked by the steady decline of the woman at its center. Elizabeth died on a cold, clear morning 3 weeks before Christmas, slipping away so quietly that Willa, dozing beside her bed, did not immediately notice the change. One moment her mother was breathing shallow, labored breaths that had become familiar over the long weeks of illness, and the next she was simply not. The funeral was small but dignified, attended by a handful of longtime family friends and business associates of her late father. Willa stood dry-eyed beside the grave, wearing the black bombazine dress that had been hastily made for the occasion. She felt hollow, emptied of emotion by the long vigilance of her mother's illness and now by the finality of her loss. Aunt Margaret remained for a week after the funeral, helping to sort through Elizabeth's belongings and offering whatever comfort her stern New England nature allowed. But she had her own household to return to, her own family requiring her attention with the holidays approaching. "What will you do now?" she asked Willa on the eve of her departure. "Will you sell the house?" It was a practical question, one Willa had been considering without reaching a conclusion. "I'm not certain," she admitted. "The mortgage is substantial. Even if I sold, there might be little remaining after settling it." "You could stay in Boston," Margaret suggested. "Find a position as a companion or governess, perhaps. With your education and background, a respectable family would consider you." The idea held no appeal. After the freedom and purpose she had found in the Arizona Territory, the thought of becoming a glorified servant in someone else's household was unbearable. "I have other options," Willa said, thinking of the claim and the promising strike they had begun to develop before her hasty departure. "My venture in the West may provide a better future." Margaret's expression registered disapproval, though she chose her words carefully. "The frontier is no place for a woman alone, Willa. Your mother worried constantly about your safety there." "I wasn't alone," Willa said, echoing her words to her mother. "I had formed a partnership with a rancher named Owen Ryder." "A business partnership?" Margaret asked, her tone suggesting she suspected more. "Yes," Willa replied, then more honestly, though it might have become something else given time. Her aunt studied her for a long moment. "You care for this man?" "Yes. Enough to return to that wild country, to build a life there." The question crystallized the decision Willa had been approaching gradually since her mother's death. Did she want to return to the Arizona Territory? "To the claim, to the ranch, to Owen, I believe so," she said slowly, "though there are practical matters to resolve here first." Margaret nodded, seeming to accept if not approve of her decision. "Then resolve them quickly before winter makes travel impossible. If your heart is truly in the West, you shouldn't delay your return." The advice, practical as always, helped clarify Willa's path forward. She would sell the house and settle her mother's remaining debts, then return to Copper Springs as soon as arrangements could be made. Whatever future awaited her there, with the claim, with Owen, it called to her more strongly than anything remaining for her in Boston. The process of settling her mother's estate took longer than Willa had hoped. The house, once a point of pride for the Morrison family, proved difficult to sell in winter, especially with its location in a neighborhood that had declined in fashionability. Eventually, she accepted an offer significantly below what she had hoped for, but enough to clear the mortgage and remaining debts with a small sum left over. She wrote to Owen regularly during this time, updating him on her situation and receiving in return detailed accounts of developments at the claim and ranch. The strike they had discovered before her departure was proving substantial, he reported. The hired miners had expanded the tunnel considerably, following the vein deeper into the hillside with consistently positive results. "We've established regular shipments to the assay office," he wrote in January. "Your share of the proceeds is being held in your name at the Copper Springs Bank. The amount is becoming significant enough that you might consider more permanent security arrangements upon your return." The good news about the claim was tempered by other developments. Cattle raiders had struck again in the territory, though not at the Ryder Ranch this time. Oliver had been injured in a fall from his horse while checking fence lines but was recovering well. And most concerningly, interest in the Morrison claim had attracted unwanted attention. "Strangers have been seen watching the claim from the ridge," Owen wrote in his most recent letter. "Nothing overtly threatening but enough to warrant caution. I've arranged for continuous security, with Martinez or Frank always present on the property. I would advise discretion when you return, at least until we can assess the situation more fully. The warning was concerning but not entirely surprising. Success in mining often attracted those looking to profit from others' discoveries. It was one more reason to expedite her return to the Arizona territory, where she could help protect what she and Owen had worked so hard to develop. By early February, Willa had settled all her affairs in Boston. The house was sold, her mother's personal belongings either distributed to family or packed for Willa to take west, and preparations for the long journey completed. Standing in what had been her childhood home, now empty of furniture and family, Willa felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. "Goodbye, Mother," she whispered to the silent rooms. "I hope you understand why I must return." She could almost hear Elizabeth's voice in response. "Life is always uncertain, my dear. That's why we must grasp happiness when it presents itself." The journey west was as arduous as the eastward trip had been, complicated by winter weather that delayed trains and made stagecoach travel even more uncomfortable than usual. Yet Willa found herself energized rather than depleted by the challenges. Each mile westward felt like a step toward home, toward purpose, toward a future she had chosen rather than one dictated by circumstance or convention. As the landscape gradually transformed from the settled farmlands of the Midwest to the rugged mountains and deserts of the territories, Willa found her spirits rising despite the discomforts of travel. The vast openness, the dramatic skies, the sense of unlimited possibility, all resonated with something deep within her that had never quite fit in Boston's confined propriety. She had telegraphed ahead from Denver, informing Owen of her expected arrival date in Copper Springs. As the stagecoach finally approached the town on a crisp March afternoon, Willa found herself scanning the street eagerly for a familiar figure. Owen was waiting at the stagecoach stop, his tall form immediately recognizable among the small crowd. He had dressed with unusual care, she noted, clean shirt and vest, hair neatly trimmed, boots polished, yet his expression was guarded, uncertain, as if he wasn't sure what version of Willa Morrison might step down from the coach after nearly 4 months away. For her part, Willa felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed her of speech. In all her practical planning for return, she had somehow failed to prepare herself for this moment, seeing Owen again, confronting directly the feelings that had grown during their separation. The stagecoach rolled to a stop and the driver called out, "Copper Springs, last stop for today." Willa gathered her reticule and small traveling bag, allowing the driver to assist her down from the high step. Her feet had barely touched the ground when she looked up to find Owen standing before her, hat in hand, blue eyes searching her face as if for confirmation of something vital. "Welcome back," he said simply. "It's good to be home," Willa replied, the word home slipping out naturally, revealing more of her heart than she had intended in this public setting. Owen's expression warmed at her choice of words. "You must be exhausted from the journey. Mrs. Holloway has your room ready, or," he hesitated, "Mrs. Farley has also prepared space at the ranch if you'd prefer." The offer carried implications beyond immediate lodging, a choice between returning to her independent status in town or accepting closer integration with the Ryder household. In Boston, Willa might have deflected the decision, might have hidden behind social convention or the need for further consideration. But she was no longer the same woman who had left Boston seeking fortune in the West. She had found not only gold but her own strength, her own ability to recognize and choose what truly mattered. "The ranch, I think," she said, meeting Owen's gaze directly. "If that's agreeable." The simple statement changed everything between them. Owen's careful restraint gave way to a smile of such genuine happiness that it transformed his entire countenance. "Very agreeable," he said, his voice warm with feeling. "Your larger luggage." "Being sent on the freight wagon tomorrow," Willa explained. "This is all I have for tonight." Owen took the small bag from her hand. "My horse is just there. And I brought Mariposa for you, if you're not too tired to ride." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, bringing the gentle mare she had grown comfortable with during their partnership, touched Willa deeply. It was so characteristic of Owen, this attention to details that would make her comfortable and welcome. I'm not too tired, she assured him, though in truth the long journey had been exhausting. I've missed riding. As they walked toward the waiting horses, Owen spoke quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. I've missed you, Willa, more than I can properly express on a public street. The simple admission, unadorned with flowery declarations or excessive sentiment, was perfectly Owen, honest, direct, respectful of both his own feelings and hers. And you, she replied with equal simplicity. We have much to discuss, I think. We do, he agreed, but first let's get you settled. There will be time for talking once you've rested. The ride to the Ryder ranch was peaceful, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape Willa had come to love during her months in the territory. Owen brought her up to date on ranch matters and developments at the claim, his tone businesslike but underlaid with the warmth that had characterized their partnership from the beginning. The tunnel has been expanded considerably, he explained as they rode. We're following the vein deeper into the hillside with good results throughout. Your share of the proceeds so far would allow you to live quite comfortably, even if we never found another ounce. And you mentioned security concerns, Willa prompted, remembering his letters. Owen's expression grew more serious. There have been interested parties, nothing overtly threatening but enough attention that we've maintained round-the-clock presence at the claim. Garrett and Phillips, the miners we hired, are experienced and level-headed. They've had to discourage a few curious visitors but no serious trouble so far. His careful wording suggested he was minimizing potential dangers, a suspicion confirmed when he added, "Still, I'd prefer if you didn't visit the claim alone, at least for now. Not until we're certain the interest is purely professional rather than predatory." Willa nodded, appreciating both his concern and the fact that he expressed it as a preference rather than a command. I'll be cautious, she assured him. I have no desire to put at risk what we've worked so hard to develop. The "we" in her statement seemed to please Owen, his expression softening as they continued toward the ranch. The main house came into view as they crested a rise, looking exactly as Willa remembered, solid, welcoming, a true home rather than merely shelter. As they approached, the front door opened and Mrs. Farley emerged onto the porch, hands on her hips but a broad smile belying her stern posture. About time you got back, girl, she called as they dismounted. Been nothing but gloom and work around here since you left, never seen men so disagreeable without proper female company. The gruff welcome made Willa laugh, the first real laughter she had experienced since before her mother's illness. I've missed you too, Mrs. Farley, she said, embracing the older woman. Mrs. Farley returned the embrace briefly, then held Willa at arm's length, assessing her with sharp eyes. Too thin, she pronounced. Boston didn't feed you properly. We'll fix that, dinner's nearly ready, roast beef and potatoes, and I made apple pie. Sounds wonderful, Willa said sincerely. After weeks of travel food, a home-cooked meal would be heaven. Oliver appeared from the direction of the stables, his greeting more reserved than Mrs. Farley's but still warmer than it had been before Willa's departure. Miss Morrison, he said, touching his hat, good to see you back safe. Thank you, Mr. Ryder, Willa replied. I understand you had quite a fall while I was away. I'm glad to see you recovered. Oliver shrugged off the reference to his injury. Takes more than a spill to keep a rider down. Then, with a glance at his brother, he added, though some have been down without any fall at all. Moping around like lost calves. The teasing reference to Owen's apparent melancholy during her absence brought color to Willa's cheeks. Oliver's knowing smile suggested he was well aware of exactly how the land lay between them, and approved. Glad to have the extra hands, Oliver continued, though his eyes were twinkling, especially ones that know how to keep the books straight. The welcome dinner that evening was a festive affair, far removed from the somber meals Willa had endured in Boston. Mrs. Farley had outdone herself, serving roast beef that melted in the mouth and an apple pie spiced perfectly with cinnamon. The conversation flowed easily, catching Willa up on local news and ranch business, weaving her back into the fabric of their lives as if she had never left. Yet beneath the warmth, Willa sensed an undercurrent of tension in Owen. He ate little, his gaze frequently drifting to the window where darkness had fallen over the ranch. When the meal concluded and Oliver retired to the study with a new agricultural journal, Owen invited Willa for a walk on the porch. "You're worried," she said once they were alone in the cool night air. It wasn't a question. Owen leaned against the railing, looking out toward the distant silhouette of the hills where their claim lay. "I didn't want to alarm you on your first night back, but the interested parties I mentioned, they've become more aggressive in the last week." Willa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. How so? "They've moved beyond watching. 2 days ago, Garrett found signs that someone had tried to force the lock on the tool shed at the claim. And yesterday, a Ryder intercepted Frank on his way back from town, asking pointed questions about our shipment schedule." "Did Frank recognize him?" "No. A stranger, hard-looking, carrying a sidearm low on his hip." Owen turned to face her, his expression grim in the moonlight. "I think they're planning something, Willa. They know we've hit a rich vein, and they know we haven't made a major shipment to the assay office in weeks because I was waiting for your return." The implication was clear. A significant amount of gold had accumulated at the claim, a tempting prize for anyone bold enough to take it. "We need to move the gold," Willa said, her practical mind engaging the problem. "It's too dangerous to keep it at the cabin." "I agree. I was planning to transport it to the bank in Copper Springs tomorrow, but the road is predictable, and if they're watching—" "Then we don't use the road," Willa cut in. "And we don't go tomorrow." Owen looked at her with interest. "What do you propose?" "We go tonight," she said, the plan forming rapidly in her mind. "Under cover of darkness, and we take the old sheep trail over the ridge, not the main road. It's rougher but unexpected." "It's dangerous in the dark," Owen countered. "One misstep." "We know the land," Willa reminded him, "and Mariposa is sure-footed. If we leave within the hour, we can reach town before dawn, deposit the gold in the bank's night safe, and be having breakfast at Mrs. Holloway's before anyone knows we've left the ranch." Owen studied her face, searching for hesitation and finding none. A slow smile spread across his features, not the polite smile of a gentleman but the reckless, admiring grin of a partner who recognized his match. "You really are something, Willa Morrison," he said softly. "Very well, I'll tell Oliver and round up the men. We'll need an escort." "No," Willa said firmly. "A large group attracts attention, just you and me. We look like a couple taking a moonlight ride, nothing more." It was a risk, they both knew, but it was also their best chance to move the gold without alerting those who watched the ranch. They rode out an hour later, slipping away from the main house while the ranch was sleeping. The moon was waning, providing just enough light to see the trail without exposing them to distant observers. Willa carried her small revolver in the pocket of her riding coat, its weight a comforting reminder of the skills she had practiced with Owen in the months before her departure. The ride was tense but uneventful at first. They navigated the rocky terrain of the sheep trail in silence, the only sounds the muffled hoofbeats of their horses and the wind sighing through the sagebrush. The gold, nearly 20 pounds of dust and nuggets accumulated over the winter, was packed into saddlebags distributed between their two mounts. They had reached the narrow pass known as Devil's Gap, a choke point where the trail wound between high rock walls when Mariposa suddenly shied, her ears pinning back. "Steady," Willa whispered, stroking the mare's neck. But her own senses were on high alert. The silence of the canyon felt heavy, unnatural. "Owen," she breathed. "I know," he replied, his voice barely audible. "Keep moving. Don't stop." They urged the horses forward, eyes scanning the shadows. They were halfway through the gap when a voice rang out from the darkness above. "That's far enough, Ryder." Two figures stepped out from behind boulders on the ridge, rifles leveled. At the same moment, a rider blocked the trail ahead and another appeared behind them, effectively boxing them in. "Well, well," a rough voice sneered from the rider ahead. "Look what we have here. A midnight stroll with the lady partner." Owen moved his horse closer to Willa's, shielding her with his body. "Let us pass, Kincaid. You don't want to do this." "I think I do," the man named Kincaid replied. He was big, bearded, with the look of a man who had long ago abandoned any pretense of lawful living. "We know what's in those bags. Hand it over, and maybe we let you ride out of here." "And maybe you don't," Owen said coolly. His hand hovered near his hip, but he didn't draw. The odds were 4-2, and the men on the ridge had the high ground. Smart man, Kincaid laughed, now tossed down the bags. Willa's mind raced, they were trapped. Surrender meant losing everything they had worked for and likely their lives, as witnesses were an inconvenience men like Kincaid rarely tolerated. She looked at the steep slope to their left. It was a scree field, treacherous and steep, leading down into a dry wash. No horse could navigate it safely at speed, but it was the only direction not blocked by a gun. She caught Owen's eye. He gave a barely perceptible nod, his gaze flickering to the same slope. He had seen it too. "All right," Owen said loudly, reaching for his saddlebag. "You win, no gold is worth dying for." He unbuckled the flap, pulling out a heavy pouch. Kincaid relaxed slightly, greedy anticipation lowering his guard. "That's it," Kincaid urged, "toss it here." "Catch," Owen said, but he didn't toss it to Kincaid. He hurled the heavy pouch with all his strength at the head of Kincaid's horse. The animal reared violently, screaming as the gold struck it. Kincaid fought to stay in the saddle, his rifle firing wildly into the air. "Now," Owen roared. He slapped Mariposa's rump hard. Willa didn't hesitate. She spurred the mare not forward but sideways, straight off the trail and down the scree slope. It was a terrifying descent. The horses slid and scrambled, hooves striking sparks from the shifting rock. Above them, shouts and gunfire erupted. A bullet whined past Willa's ear, too close. She pulled the revolver from her pocket, twisting in the saddle to fire back blindly at the ridge, hoping to keep their attackers' heads down. Beside her, Owen was doing the same, his colt barking defiance. They hit the bottom of the wash in a cloud of dust and sliding gravel. "Run!" Owen shouted. They galloped down the dry creek bed, the high banks offering cover from the men on the ridge. But the riders, Kincaid and the man behind them, would be forced to take the long way around to pursue them. They had bought perhaps 5 minutes. "The old mine," Willa gasped as they rode, wind tearing the words from her mouth. "The ventilation shaft." Owen understood instantly. About a mile ahead lay the abandoned Silver Queen mine. Its main entrance had collapsed years ago, but a ventilation shaft remained open, accessible from a hidden ravine. It was a defensive position they could hold. They pushed the horses to their limit, racing against the sound of pursuit that was already echoing down the canyon. They reached the ravine, dismounted, and slapped the horses to send them running on, a decoy to lead Kincaid away. Scrambling up the rocky slope, they reached the shaft entrance just as the pursuers rounded the bend below. They dove inside into the cool darkness of the earth. "They saw the horses," Owen whispered, watching from the shadows of the entrance. "They're following them." "For now," Willa said, checking her revolver. She had 3 shots left. Owen reloaded his Colt with steady hands. "They'll realize we're not mounted when they catch them," Owen said. "Then they'll come back, we need to be ready." They waited in the silence of the mine. Willa found her hands shaking, not with fear but with adrenaline. She reached out, finding Owen's hand in the dark. He gripped it hard. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I should never have brought you into this." "I chose this," she reminded him fiercely. "I chose the partnership, I chose you." He looked at her, his eyes gleaming in the faint light from the entrance. "Willa." "They're coming back," she hissed, hearing the sound of hoofbeats returning. Kincaid was smart. He had realized the trick quickly. The riders slowed, scanning the canyon walls. "They went to ground," Kincaid's voice drifted up. "Check the caves." The siege began. For an hour they held the entrance. Owen was a crack shot, and his warning fire kept the men pinned behind rocks below. Willa watched the flank, spotting one of the ridgemen trying to circle above them and driving him back with a well-placed shot that kicked up dirt at his feet. "She shoots like a man," the bandit yelled, sounding surprised and indignant. "Better," Willa shouted back, a fierce joy singing in her blood. She wasn't a victim, she wasn't a damsel. She was fighting for her life and her fortune, and she was winning, but their ammunition was low. "We can't hold them forever," Owen said quietly. "Eventually they'll rush us or smoke us out." "We don't need forever," Willa said. She pointed to the sky visible through the shaft opening. "Look." The darkness was thinning, dawn was breaking, and with the dawn came a sound sweeter than any music, the distant, rhythmic thudding of a large group of riders. Oliver, he must have discovered their absence and the missing gold and drawn the right conclusion. "Ryder," Kincaid shouted from below, "you hear that? That's my reinforcements." "I don't think so," Owen called back. "I think that's the cavalry." The hoofbeats grew louder, thundering into the canyon. Kincaid looked back and his face went pale. It wasn't just Oliver and the ranch hands, it was the sheriff from Copper Springs and a posse of deputies. "Law," Kincaid screamed, "ride." The bandits scrambled for their horses, abandoning the siege in a desperate attempt to flee, but they were caught in the open. Oliver and the posse swept into the canyon, cutting off their escape. It was over in minutes. Kincaid and his men surrendered, outgunned and outmaneuvered. Willa and Owen emerged from the mine shaft, dirty, exhausted, but unharmed. Oliver rode up to them, sliding from his horse to grip his brother's shoulder. "You two are insane," Oliver said, his voice shaking with relief. "Running off in the middle of the night with that much gold." "Seemed like a good idea at the time," Owen said, grinning crookedly. He looked at Willa. "And we had a solid plan." "Mostly." "Mostly," Willa agreed, holstering her pistol. She looked at the captured bandits, then at the gold they had retrieved from the saddlebags before sending the horses off. It was all there. They had won. The ride back to the ranch was a victory procession. The gold was deposited in the bank's safe, Kincaid and his gang were locked in the jail, and the town of Copper Springs was buzzing with the story of the schoolteacher-turned-miner who had held off outlaws in a mine shaft. But for Willa and Owen, the real conversation waited until they were back at the ranch, standing on the porch as the sun set over the purple hills, a mirror of the evening before she had left for Boston, but with the uncertainty removed. They were washed and changed, the dust of the fight gone, but the bond forged in the danger remained, thrumming between them. "So," Owen said, leaning against the railing, "the gold is safe. Your fortune is secured." "Our fortune," she corrected. "Right, our fortune." He looked down at his hands. "You have enough now, Willa. You could go back to Boston in style, buy a house on Beacon Hill. Live the life you were raised for." Willa looked at him. She thought of Boston, the gray skies, the rigid rules, the tea parties where women spoke in whispers and men made the decisions. Then she looked at the man beside her, the man who had treated her as an equal from the first moment, who had fought beside her, who had waited for her. "I suppose I could," she said slowly. "But there's a problem." "Oh," Owen looked up, bracing himself. "I seem to have left my heart in the Arizona territory," she said, "and I don't think I can live without it." Owen stared at her, hope dawning in his eyes like the sunrise. "Willa, you asked me once what I envisioned for my future," she said, stepping closer to him. "I told you I wanted independence, and I do, but I realized something in that mine shaft, Owen. Independence is cold comfort if you have no one to share the victory with." She reached out, taking his hand, his fingers laced with hers, a perfect fit. "I don't want a mansion in Boston," she whispered. "I want a cabin with a view of the mountains. I want to argue about mining techniques. I want to ride Mariposa. I want you." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious gold he had ever found. "You have me," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "You have all of me, the ranch, the claim, the man. Whatever you want." "I want us," she said, "partners in everything." He kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that tasted of survival and promise, and a love that had been tested by fire and distance and found true. "Marry me," he murmured against her lips. "Make it a permanent partnership." "Yes," Willa said, laughing with pure joy. "Yes, Cowboy, I will." Epilogue. 5 years later, 1881. The sign above the entrance to the valley was new, painted in bold black letters. RYDER and MORRISON Mining Co. Below it, a smaller sign read, Ryder Ranch Est 1858. Willa stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching a small boy of 4 chase a puppy through the garden she had planted. He stumbled, laughed, and picked himself up, dusting off his miniature trousers with a determination that mirrored her own. "He's going to be a handful," Oliver commented, coming up the steps with a ledger in his hand. "Just like his mother." "He's spirited," Willa corrected with a smile, "and he has his uncle's stubbornness." Oliver laughed. "Fair enough." He handed her the ledger. "Production is up another 10% this month. That new vein in the lower shaft is proving to be the best yet." Willa took the book, scanning the figures with a practiced eye. She was still very much involved in the business, managing the finances and strategy while Owen and Oliver managed the operations. It was a balance that worked perfectly. She had her independence, her work, and her family, A rider appeared on the ridge. Owen, returning from the claim. He saw her on the porch and waved, spurring his horse into a gallop. Willa's heart gave the same little leap it always did when she saw him. She handed the ledger back to Oliver and walked down the steps to meet her husband. Owen swung down from the saddle, dusty and tired but grinning. He caught her around the waist and spun her around, ignoring Oliver's amused snort from the porch. "Find anything good today?" she asked, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Found a nugget the size of a hen's egg," he said casually. "Owen, truly." "Truly," he kissed her nose, "but I put it in the safe." "I'd rather look at you." Willa leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She looked out over the valley, at the mine that was building their legacy, at the ranch that was their home, at the sun playing in the grass. She had come west seeking a fortune of gold to save herself. She had found it. But as Owen's arms tightened around her, Willa knew she had found the only fortune that really mattered. She had found a life that was entirely, wonderfully her own.